Hi guys, tonight's story is about bread. Yes, bread. You probably won't make it through this day, but if you do, congratulations, you've lasted longer than most Roman loaves that went stale within hours. Before we begin, I'll whisper the usual requests. If you like drifting into ancient streets that smell faintly of flour and ash, give this video a soft little like. If you enjoy falling asleep halfway through a sentence about ovens that were shaped like upside-down helmets, subscribe. It keeps me fed metaphorically, of course. And, if you feel like it, let me know in the comments where you are right now, and what time it is there. I like imagining someone listening to this at 3 in the morning in Wisconsin, while another person nods off on a late afternoon train in Tokyo. Now take a breath. Let your eyes feel heavy, maybe stretch a little. Now let's ease into tonight's journey. You walk slowly through Rome, in the late summer twilight of the 1st century. The air feels dusty, like a chalkboard that has been wiped down but not rinsed. Around you, the streets murmur with voices. People shout at donkeys that refuse to move. A child drags a stick along a wall, producing a sound not unlike an exhausted xylophone. Somewhere, a man is hawking roasted chestnuts, though you're fairly sure he's eaten half his own stock already. Your sandals scuff along the uneven stones of the Via Lotta. The city smells of smoke and sweat, but also of baking warm, yeasty, earthy bread. It wafts out from a nearby pistrinum, one of the many bakeries tucked along the streets like cozy little fireboxes. These bakeries were important because Roman households didn't usually bake their own bread. The ovens were too big, the fuel too scarce, and, let's be honest, no one wanted to set their wooden apartment on fire just for a crusty roll. So, instead, families carried their raw dough to the bakery, marked with a stamp, and waited for it to come out baked. A communal oven before it was trendy. You step closer, peeking inside. The bakery glows with orange firelight. Men in tunics move like shadows, tossing round loaves into the deep, beehive-shaped oven with long paddles. Some loaves are split into 8 neat wedges. On top one is quadratus, they call it, pre-cut, so you don't argue at the table about portion size. A clever idea, except for the person who inevitably gets the smallest slice. And there, in the corner, you see him, the baker himself. He's not wearing a crown of laurel like a victorious general, nor a wreath of flowers like a festival goer. No, balanced upon his head is a crown of bread. Yes, actual bread. Slightly ridiculous perhaps, but deeply symbolic. Roman bakers wore these edible crowns in processions and ceremonies to show their importance. After all, no empire marches on an empty stomach. Caesar might have conquered Gaul, but the baker conquered your hunger pangs. One obscure little tidbit: some bakers' guilds even used bread crowns in their official emblems, carved into stone reliefs. Imagine signing a contract under the proud logo of a baguette hat. Historians still debate whether these crowns were actually eaten afterward, or simply dried out as ceremonial props. If they were eaten, you can only hope the sweat factor was minimal. The baker glances up, adjusts the slightly crooked loaf crown on his head, and shouts at an apprentice who just dropped a tray. You can't hear the words over the crackle of the oven, but you sense the universal rhythm of a workplace scolding. Some things never change. The boy blushes, the baker mutters, and you smell the faintly sour scent of fermenting dough being kneaded nearby. You stand a little longer, letting the rhythm of the bakery lull you. The hiss of steam, the crunch of flour underfoot, the shuffle of wooden paddles against stone. The city outside feels distant now, muffled. The bakery is its own world, warm and repetitive, like a heartbeat. And just as your eyes begin to droop, you notice an inscription carved above the doorway. Pistrinum felicitas, the bakery of happiness. You smile to yourself, because really, what else could bread be? The next morning rises soft and hazy. You wake, or maybe you never quite slept, listening to the early clatter of carts on stone. Rome never rests, not really. The city is like a neighbor who insists on vacuuming at odd hours. You walk again, past the same bakery, and notice a small crowd gathered outside. A procession is forming. Today, the Bakers' Guild is celebrating a festival day, perhaps for Ceres, the goddess of grain. The guild members emerge, solemn and proud, each wearing their peculiar crowns of bread. Some are simple rings of dough, browned and glossy. Others are more elaborate, braided and decorated with poppy seeds. One ambitious fellow seems to have balanced what looks suspiciously like an entire focaccia on his head. You half expect him to tilt forward under the weight. The crowd watches with mild amusement. Children giggle and point. Someone mutters that the bread would be put to better use in the mouths of the hungry. Someone else shrugs. This is Rome, after all. Spectacle matters. Bread is never just bread. A fact here, in Roman society, bakers were often freedmen, former slaves, who found steady livelihoods through the trade. Their guilds held power, not quite at the level of senators or soldiers, but enough to command respect. And bread was so essential that during shortages, riots could erupt. An emperor's popularity could crumble faster than a stale crust if the grain shipments from Egypt were delayed. One obscure little tidbit: some bakers reportedly trained parrots to squawk advertisements from shop windows. Imagine walking by and hearing fresh bread, best in Rome, shouted by a bird. It may or may not have been effective marketing, but it was certainly memorable. Historians still debate whether the parrots were actually widespread or just the eccentric hobby of one overly ambitious baker with too much free time. You drift along the edge of the procession, listening. The bakers chant in low voices, carrying trays piled high with loaves. The crowns on their heads bobbed gently, absurd yet dignified, like edible halos. You catch the eye of one older man, his crown a perfectly golden ring, and he smiles as if to say, "Yes, we know this looks strange, but someone has to keep Rome fed." The procession turns down a familiar street. Remember the one where the child dragged the stick along the wall yesterday? It's back, now echoing with the sound of sandals and rhythmic drumming. The bakers passed under garlands, strung between buildings, the smell of fresh bread trailing behind them like incense. And you, half walking, half dreaming, begin to notice how the city itself seems built on bread. The marble temples, the noisy taverns, the bustling forums, all of them depend on the daily miracle of dough and fire. Bread is currency, bread is politics, bread is survival. A small boy tugs at your tunic and whispers, "Do you think the crowns taste good?" You glance down, smile faintly, and answer that you're not sure, but maybe, if you're patient, you'll find out. The procession fades into the distance, and you are left once again with the slow hum of the city. A donkey brays, a door creaks. Somewhere, the parrot saw. Was it just your imagination? Shout again about fresh bread, and as the warmth of the morning sun soaks into your skin, you feel your eyelids growing heavy. Rome moves on, and you drift with it, step by step, crumb by crumb, into the soft haze of history. The sun climbs higher, and the stones under your feet warm like a slow-baked hearth. You wander deeper into the city, into the tangled lanes where the smell of fish markets collides with the perfume of garlands. You pass a fountain where women lean in with clay jars, gossiping as casually as pigeons on a ledge. The water drips steadily, and you notice someone has left a half-eaten loaf of bread on the edge, already hard as a rock, as if time itself decided to preserve it. You pause to imagine biting into it. No, thank you. Roman bread was often dense, gritty with bits of stone from poorly ground flour. Dentists in modern times have studied Roman skeletons and found their teeth worn down like old pebbles. Bread was delicious, yes, but also a dental hazard. You might say every loaf doubled as an exfoliant for the molars, and yet the people adored it. You stroll into a small square where bakers are selling fresh loaves from baskets. The bread is stamped with symbols, marks of the families who ordered them. A loaf from this stall might have the imprint of a dolphin, another of a flower, another perhaps of initials. Imagine your grocery store today handing out sourdough carved with emojis. One major fact drifts into view here. In 79 CE, when Mount Vesuvius erupted, it preserved not only bodies and houses, but also bread. Archaeologists in Pompeii have found loaves of Ponies quadratus, still round, still scored, blackened into carbon, but undeniably bread. Some even bear the names of their owners stamped across the crust. 2,000 years later, their dinner rolls survive, while your leftovers from last week's fridge experiment didn't. A cultural tidbit slips in as you watch the bustle. Some Romans believed that bread had protective qualities, not just for hunger, but from evil. To dream of bread was sometimes considered a good omen. There were superstitions about touching bread with dirty hands, or placing it upside down. A little like the modern fear of spilling salt, except tastier. Historians still debate whether these beliefs were widespread or just the anxious murmurs of a few households who really, really loved their carbs. You watch a woman tear a loaf in half, hand one piece to her son, and tuck the other piece carefully under her arm. The boy immediately drops crumbs on the ground, which pigeons dive for. Pigeons, you realize, are eternal. They were already here in Rome, pecking at bread, waddling without shame. Some things survive every empire. A man selling figs nearby calls out to you, but you wave him off gently. You're still lost in the rhythm of bread, its shapes, its scents, its weight in the hands of the people. The square hums with chatter, sunlight, and crumbs. And just when you think you might drift away into a nap against the fountain, a new sound emerges. The clanging of metal, a cart being rolled into the square. You turn to see it laden with flour sacks, each marked with the seal of the state. These are the unknown supplies, the grain dole, part of Rome's social safety net. The empire distributed grain to citizens, a way to keep the people fed and, let's be honest, a little less riotous. Bread and circuses, as they liked to say, keep the stomach full, and maybe the fists stay lowered. The cart creaks to a halt, and a clerk begins to read names from a wax tablet. People shuffle forward, patient, resigned. You lean against the column and feel the heat settle over you. Another loaf crown glints in the corner of your eye. Another baker, supervising his delivery. He scratches his chin, adjusts the bread halo, and squints into the sunlight. Bread crowns again. You smile faintly. This city can make even carbohydrates ceremonial. The day drifts on, slower now, as if the heat presses down on every breath. You follow a narrow lane shaded by wooden awnings. The walls are painted with fading murals, gods, vines, and, curiously, a large painting of a loaf of bread. Romans loved to decorate with food. Frescoes in Pompeii show bread stacked in baskets, golden and round, offered up like art. Imagine redecorating your living room with a tasteful portrait of bagels. You step inside a Popinier tavern, small and dim. The air smells faintly of wine that has been watered down, as was the Roman way. Patrons lounge on stools, hunched over bowls of lentils, olives, and, naturally, bread. The loaves are cut thick, used to scoop food like edible utensils. A man beside you dips his bread into a garlicky sauce, sighs contentedly, and promptly spills some down his tunic. Even in antiquity, laundry was never safe. You order nothing. This is a dream walk. After all, but you notice something interesting. On the counter rests a small, slightly stale crown of bread. Decorative, perhaps. Or maybe the tavern keeper is a retired baker, nostalgic for the days when a crown loaf on the head could mean honor rather than indigestion. Here's a fact. In 168 BCE, the Roman Senate once debated whether to regulate the weight of bread. Prices fluctuated with the grain supply, and the people complained. Eventually, bakers were bound by certain rules to prevent cheating. Bread was serious business, so serious that emperors appointed officials to oversee the grain market. Imagine an empire so vast, and yet someone's full-time job was essentially making sure your sandwich roll wasn't too small. Obscure tidbit. Some bakers in Rome kept guard dogs inside their shops, chained but visible through small gaps, not for protection against thieves of gold, but against thieves of bread. Bread theft was common, and while stealing a loaf might sound like the plot of a tragic novel, in Rome it was simply a Tuesday. Historians still debate whether the dogs were more bark than bite, or whether they occasionally enjoyed an unplanned snack of stolen crusts. You rest your elbows on the counter, watching the tavern's quiet routine. A dice game rattles in the corner. A man snores with his head on his folded arms. Outside, the clatter of the street carries on. You feel safe in the humdrum sameness of it all. The tavern keeper eventually takes the bread crown from the counter, dusts it off, and places it carefully on a shelf beside a small lamp. It sits there like a relic, reminding you once again that in Rome, food could be symbol, story, memory, not just fuel. You stand to leave, stepping back into the lane. The afternoon has settled into that sleepy stretch where shadows are long and voices soften. You think about the baker's crowns. You've seen their absurd dignity, their crumbly grandeur. Bread was never only bread, and as you walk further into the quiet city, you begin to sense that every stone, every mural, every laugh in the tavern carries the same hidden weight. Survival dressed up as ceremony. Your steps slow, your shoulders relax. The day folds over you like a linen cloth, and Rome hums softly on. Evening drifts in with a lavender glow, softening the rough edges of Rome. Shadows stretch like lazy cats across the paving stones, and the day's noise begins to settle into a gentler murmur. You walk past oil lamps being lit, one by one, their flames flickering in the dusk, making the city look like it's been sprinkled with tiny stars. The air is cooler now, scented faintly with smoke from hearths and the sharper tanks of roasting garlic. Somewhere, someone is singing a half-tuned melody off-key, but sincere. Your feet carry you toward the Campus Martis, where space is wider and the air feels more open. A few bakers are still around, finishing their deliveries for the day. You spot one carrying a basket piled so high with loaves that it looks like he's smuggling a small hill. Balanced on his head naturally is a crown of bread, tilted slightly to the side, like a jaunty hat. Perhaps, you think, bread crowns doubled as early attempts at style. Were your carbs a fashion slogan Rome didn't know it needed? One fact worth tucking into your pocket. Rome, at its height, had more than 200 public bakeries. That's a lot of bread, and a lot of bakers wearing crowns on special days. These weren't hobbyists, they were the backbone of city life, as essential as water carriers or soldiers. Without bakers, the empire would be a hungry mess. As you linger, you overhear two women chatting about the quality of the day's loaves. One complains hers is too flat, the other boasts that her baker's bread rose so high it nearly toppled. You realize that not much has changed in 2,000 years. Humans will always compare bread. Someone's sourdough starter will always be superior. An obscure tidbit slips through the evening air. In some parts of the empire, bread was baked with honey or cheese inside, small luxuries folded into the daily grind. These were festival treats, sweet or savory surprises hidden in the crust. Historians still debate whether the average Roman ever tasted them, or if such loaves were reserved for the wealthy. Either way, the thought makes your stomach hum like a small lyre. You sit on a low wall and watch as the bakers gather in their guild house nearby. The doorway is marked with a relief carving. Yes, a loaf of bread, but also a crown. Their laughter drifts out to you, warm and human, filling the twilight with ordinary joy. You imagine the bakers pulling off their crowns after a long day, setting them aside with a sigh of relief, perhaps nibbling on the edges if hunger was stronger than dignity. The city grows quieter still. Lamps flicker, footsteps fade, and even the pigeons seem to have tucked themselves away. You feel the hush of Rome at rest, wrapped in bread, smoke, and shadows. Night comes fully, heavy and slow. You wander through streets that feel dreamlike now, lanterns glowing like tiny islands in the darkness. The clatter and bustle have dissolved into softer sounds, the occasional bark of a dog, the creak of a cartwheel far away, the muffled laughter of a tavern still open. You breathe in air that smells of cooled stone and faint ash. You find yourself near the Tiber, where water glimmers under the moonlight like melted silver. A baker's boat is moored nearby, sacks of flour stacked neatly, waiting for dawn deliveries. The crown motif is there again, painted on the side of the boat, though a little smudged, as if the river has been nibbling at it. You wonder how many boats once ferried flour along this river, how many crowns of bread silently marked their passage. Here's a fact. Rome's grain supply depended heavily on imports from Egypt. Ships carried thousands of tons of wheat across the Mediterranean, ensuring the city could feed its swelling population. Without those shipments, the ovens would cool, and unrest would spread faster than butter on warm bread. Bread was not just dinner, it was empire. A strange tidbit whispers to you. Some ancient bakers supposedly offered bread as votive gifts at temples, shaping loaves into animal forms or small crowns as offerings. Imagine a table of miniature bread goats left in gratitude to a god. Historians still debate whether these offerings were consumed by priests or simply left to harden as holy breadcrumbs. Either way, it makes you picture the gods themselves, rolling their eyes at yet another bread-shaped dedication. The river gurgles gently. A night breeze brushes your cheek, carrying the faintest whiff of flour dust. You notice the baker's apprentice sleeping on the boat's deck, crown of bread beside him like a pillow ornament. The crown looks less majestic now, more like tomorrow's breakfast. You smile at the thought. As you linger by the river, you feel how the day has slowed into a lullaby. Every sound is stretched, softened. Your own steps echo faintly, and even your thoughts seem to tread more lightly. Rome is still awake, yes, but it hums now rather than shouts. You take one last glance at the flour sacks, the crown painting on the boat, the sleeping apprentice. Then you turn away, walking back into the city where the night waits, cool and drowsy. The crowns of bread drift through your mind like gentle halos, ridiculous and yet somehow sacred. The empire sleeps, and you float with it, calm as a crumb on a tide. The morning returns, as mornings tend to do, even for an empire that wishes it could sleep in. You rise with the slow hum of carts creaking along the streets, their wooden wheels knocking like a heartbeat against the cobbles. Rome smells different in the early hours, less smoke, more dew, and the faint perfume of herbs being laid out by vendors. You hear the rustle of cloth as awnings are pulled open, revealing baskets of figs, bowls of olives, and, of course, more bread, always bread. You find yourself drawn once again to the baker's quarter. The pistrina are alive with activity, their doorways glowing orange as fires roar to life. Apprentices stumble about, bleary-eyed, carrying heavy sacks of flour on their shoulders. Their tunics are already powdered white, so much so that they look like ghosts of their future selves forever covered in flour. A baker with a bread crown marches past you, yawning widely, and nearly collides with a donkey. The donkey looks unimpressed, which is, you realize, the donkey's natural state. Here's a fact: Roman bakers often lived above or behind their shops. The heat, the smell, the clamorate was their entire world. Archaeologists in Pompeii have uncovered bakeries with attached living spaces, complete with ovens, mills, and tiny courtyards where even the family dog might lounge. Imagine growing up with the sound of grinding mills as your lullaby. And now for a stranger tidbit: some Roman bakers used mills powered not by donkeys or slaves, but by geese. Yes, geese. Fierce, honking, wing-flapping geese harnessed to turn small grindsters. It sounds absurd, but there are inscriptions and hints in texts suggesting it happened. Historians still debate whether it was a common practice or just one baker's questionable attempt at innovation. If true, you can only imagine the noise. Honks and grinding stone, the symphony of breakfast. You lean against the doorway, watching as bread crowns are prepared for a small festival. The loaves are shaped carefully, brushed with oil to glisten, and set aside to harden just enough to perch on heads without crumbling. You catch yourself wondering what kind of head-size variety existed. Did bakers craft small crowns for children, or was it one size? The streets grow busier as the city stirs. Children dart past with bits of bread in their hands, scattering crumbs like confetti. A woman argues loudly with a baker about her order, gesturing as if the fate of the empire depends on this particular loaf. The baker sighs, adjusts his crown, and promises the bread will be delivered by noon. Some things never change. The eternal tension between customer and craftsman. The morning light brightens, and you walk on. You feel the warmth of bread ovens trailing you, like the lingering comfort of a kitchen long after you've left it. Rome stretches awake, and you drift with it, wrapped once again in the ordinary miracle of daily bread. By midday, the city swells with heat and chatter. The streets pulse with movement, vendors calling out prices, soldiers clanking in armor, children chasing one another through the dust. You find yourself drawn toward the forum, where the air is thick with politics and pigeons. The marble shines bright, almost too bright, as if the stones themselves are tired of reflecting so many speeches. On the steps of a temple, a group of bakers stand together, bread crowns perched proudly. They're here for a guild meeting, voices rising and falling like a doughy chorus. You edge closer, curious. Their discussion is animated, sprinkled with flowery metaphors. One man gestures with a loaf in his hand as though it's a scepter, declaring that bread prices must remain fair. Another insists that grain shipments are too unreliable. You nod sagely, pretending to understand, though truly, bread economics might as well be sorcery. One fact emerges clearly from this scene. Roman bakers had guilds known as collegia pastorum. These were formal associations, complete with rules, hierarchies, and rituals. Membership brought status and protection, but also obligations. A baker's crown was not just a silly hat, it was a badge of belonging, a signal that you were part of Rome's vital machinery. And here's a delightful obscurity. Some guild banquets reportedly ended with contests where bakers balanced bread loaves on their heads while dancing. Was this a real tradition, or just the kind of rumor that sticks because it's too funny to discard? Historians still debate it, but you can't help picturing a room of exhausted bakers, crowns sliding off as they twirled in clumsy circles, laughter spilling louder than the wine. The forum hums around you. Senators stride past in pristine togas, glancing only briefly at the bakers. Ordinary citizens weave through, some stopping to buy bread from stalls at the edge. The bread crowns gleam in the sun, ridiculous yet unyielding. You realize they are not just symbols, they are declarations. We feed you. You may laugh, but you need us more than you think. As you stand among the noise, a boy with a basket of rolls offers you one. You take it, thank him, and notice it bears a stamped dolphin. You smile, perhaps from the same bakery you saw yesterday. Continuity in crumbs. You bite gently, carefully. The bread is chewy, faintly sour, and sprinkled with something that might be coriander seed. Not quite modern baguette-level comfort, but enough to carry you through. You chew slowly, watching the bakers adjust their crowns, straighten their shoulders, and carry on their debates. Above it all, the sky is a deep, endless blue. The pigeons circle lazily, waiting for their share. The forum breathes, Rome continues, and you drift into the soft haze of another bread-filled afternoon. The afternoon leans heavy, as if Rome itself wishes for a nap. The stones radiate warmth beneath your sandals, and the air carries that sticky stillness that comes when shadows shrink and time feels slow. You wander down a quieter street, away from the clamor of the forum. Here, laundry lines droop between windows, tunics swaying faintly like tired flags. A dog lies sprawled in the dust, tail flicking now and then in lazy protest at the heat. You pass another bakery, smaller than the ones near the forum. The doorway is dark, but inside you glimpse familiar activity. Flour-dusted men, firelight dancing, bread crowns propped on a shelf. Not for wearing at this moment, just waiting, like ceremonial helmets, ready for the next occasion. You imagine the apprentice assigned to guard them, sworn to keep mice from nibbling the corners. Here, as a fact, Roman bakeries often used rotary mills powered by slaves, walking in circles for hours on end, pushing heavy beams. The grinding of grain was relentless, and the rhythm of those mills must have filled entire neighborhoods with a low, monotonous hum. It was the background soundtrack of Bread, the Empire's heartbeat, patient, grinding, inescapable. And then, the strange tidbit, in one bakery at Pompeii, archaeologists found graffiti on the wall that read, loosely, "I hate lazy millers," a little note of workplace frustration scrawled forever in volcanic ash. Historians still debate whether it was written by the baker, an annoyed co-worker, or just a customer tired of waiting. Either way, you can sense the sigh behind it. 2,000 years later, someone, somewhere, is writing the same complaint on a sticky note in their office. You stop to watch a boy carrying a tray of cooling loaves to the street. The bread is round, divided into wedges, stamped with marks that look oddly like flowers. Customers gather, coins ready, voices haggling over freshness. You hear someone mutter that yesterday's loaves were better, another argue the opposite. Bread, it seems, is always subject to debate. A woman buys 2 loaves and tucks them into her basket beside figs. A soldier, helmet askew, pays for one and immediately tears into it with his teeth. The crumbs fall to the ground, where pigeons descend with the precision of professional opportunists. You step aside to let the crowd flow past, leaning against a wall painted with fading red plaster. The scent of warm bread lingers, and for a moment, you forget the heat, the dust, the chatter. Everything narrows into that simple aroma: flour, water, fire, time, Rome's quiet alchemy. And just when you begin to feel drowsy against the wall, a baker emerges, wearing his bread crown once more, nodding at the customers. It looks both absurd and majestic, like a reminder that even the simplest work can carry a touch of ceremony. You smile faintly, then drift onward, letting the city pull you deeper into its sun-drenched dream. By late afternoon, the heat softens, shadows lengthen, voices rise again, and the city feels restless, eager for evening. You find yourself near a gardened courtyard, where ivy climbs up painted walls and a fountain gurgles gently. Here bakers and their families gather for a guild feast. You slip inside, unnoticed, the way dreams allow. The tables are set with bowls of olives, cheeses, lentils, and, naturally, stacks of bread. Not just ordinary loaves, but elaborate creations. Braided rings, loaves sprinkled with sesame, rolls shaped like small crowns. Children chase each other between the benches, snatching bites when they think no one is looking. A dog lurks hopefully beneath the table, tail wagging with unshakable optimism. A major fact rises here. Bakers, though essential, were sometimes viewed with suspicion in Roman society. Their work was vital, but their social rank uncertain, higher than slaves, lower than senators, somewhere in that complicated middle. Their guilds gave them protection and recognition, yet whispers lingered about profiteering or cheating weights. Bread, after all, was politics disguised as food. Now, for the curious tidbit, at some feasts, bakers supposedly crowned not only themselves, but also small statues of household gods, placing miniature bread wreaths on their heads. Imagine the household shrine glowing with lamps, the gods peering serenely out from under tiny, crusty crowns. Historians still debate whether this was a widespread custom or simply one family's quirky devotion. Either way, it adds a touch of whimsy to divine decor. You sit quietly at the edge, watching the guild celebrate. The bakers toast with watered wine, their crowns gleaming in the waning sunlight. One man jokes that his crown is heavier than his workload. Laughter ripples across the tables. Another pretends to take a bite out of his neighbor's crown. To general amusement, bread has always been both nourishment and comedy. As twilight creeps in, lamps are lit, casting golden halos over the feast. The laughter softens, children grow sleepier, and even the dog settles with a crust between his paws. You feel the warmth of the gathering, the steady hum of human connection that has always accompanied shared meals. The crowns, silly as they seem, now glow in the lamplight with a kind of dignity. They are reminders that even bakers the flour-dusted, oven-weary, could claim a moment of pride. You breathe in the scent of roasted grains, close your eyes briefly, and let the sound of voices blur into a lullaby. When you open your eyes again, the evening is deeper, cooler, calmer. The feast continues, but softer now, as though Rome itself is winding down. You step away from the courtyard, the laughter fading behind you, carrying with you the gentle truth. Crowns or not, bread made Rome whole. And, step by step, it makes you whole too. The evening thickens into a velvety blue, and Rome's streets take on that peculiar half-quiet where everything is slower, softer, yet never quite still. You walk past the glow of oil lamps, their flames making little halos against the plastered walls. Somewhere nearby, a lyre plays a melody wobbling on the edge of in tune, but gentle enough to make you forget the missed notes. You pass a bakery where the ovens have cooled for the night. The air inside lingers with the smell of ashes and flour. The baker sits at the doorway, his bread crown resting on his knee rather than his head. He turns it absently in his hands, as if wondering whether it is an honor or a nuisance. His wife leans against the wall beside him, knitting slowly. They speak in low voices, their words too soft for you to catch. But the tone tells you everything: tiredness, relief, and perhaps a small measure of pride. Here's a fact. In times of famine, bakers often bore the brunt of public anger. Even if the shortage was caused by bad weather or political mismanagement, people blamed the baker on their street corner. Riots broke out in markets, and emperors were forced to respond quickly, sometimes personally supervising grain distribution. Bread was no trivial matter. What's the hinge on which peace rested? Now for the odd tidbit. Some Romans believed that the first loaf of a batch carried luck, and that it should be shared among the household, rather than sold. It's a tiny superstition, but one that lingers like the scent of warm crust. Historians still debate whether this was just a local belief, or a practice carried across the empire. Either way, you like to imagine families gathering around the first loaf, breaking it with reverence before the rest of the batch met the market. The baker shifts, places the crown carefully on a shelf, and sighs as he rubs his shoulders. His wife offers him a piece of cheese, and for a moment, everything in their world is small and simple. Bread, cheese, a quiet evening. You almost envy them. You keep walking. The night deepens. The streets are quieter now, save for a few stragglers and the occasional bark of a dog. Even the pigeons are asleep, tucked away in ledges above. You notice the moon glinting off the rooftops, pale and steady, as if it is keeping watch over Rome's bakers and their crowns of bread. You feel the city breathe around you, slower, calmer, ready for sleep. And so you breathe with it, one slow inhale, one slow exhale, drifting deeper into the softness of night. Morning again, because history loops in rhythms like dough rising and falling. You find yourself wandering into a district where the grain warehouses loom. Massive stone buildings, tall and echoing, packed with the empire's lifeblood. The Clivus Publicius, the great granaries, were feats of engineering designed to hold enough wheat to keep Rome alive when shipments faltered. The scale is overwhelming. You see workers carrying sacks of grain, their bodies bent like question marks under the weight. The dust swirls in shafts of sunlight, coating everything in a golden haze. The air is thick with the earthy scent of wheat unbaked. still waiting to be transformed. Here's a fact. These grain supplies were so vital that they had their own administrative system. The UNA special officials oversaw it, ensuring the city's rations flowed. Emperors who managed the grain well-earned popularity. Those who failed faced unrest. Bread crowns might look whimsical, but they rested on the shoulders of a system as rigid as marble. And here's the curious tidbit. One ancient source claims that rats in the granaries grew so bold they would drag entire crusts or stolen handfuls of grain right out of workers' baskets. Some even suggest that small terracotta charms were placed near the stores to ward off vermin spirits. Historians still debate whether this was superstition or just desperate wishful thinking. Either way, the rats of Rome ate well. As you wander deeper among the sacks, you hear the grinding of millstones, the shuffling of sandals, the low chant of workers pacing their circles. It's hypnotic, round and round, grain to flour, flour to bread. You realize the city hums like one giant oven, always preparing, always transforming. A baker stands nearby, crown perched firmly on his head, supervising his portion of grain. He nods curtly, inspects the sacks, and marks them with chalk. His expression is serious, almost grim. The crown here looks less like a joke, more like a symbol of duty. Bread isn't just bread. It's order, stability, survival. You step outside the granary and blink against the bright sun. The street feels noisier now, more awake. Vendors cry out, children chatter, and a donkey refuses to move no matter how much its owner begs. Rome resumes its endless routine, grain flowing toward ovens, loaves toward tables, crowns toward heads. And you, still wandering, still drifting, realize the rhythm has seeped into you too, step by step, breath by breath, like a loaf slowly rising under a linen cloth. Rome carries you along, and you let it calm and drowsy, as if you too are just one more crumb in its endless feast. The afternoon sun slants lower, painting Rome in gold and shadow. You wander toward a quieter part of the city, where villas spread wider and the streets smell less of donkeys and more of rosemary drifting from gardens. Here, wealthy households employ their own bakers, baking not only the daily bread, but also delicacies, honey cakes, spiced loaves, and rolls flecked with herbs. You pass the open gate of such a villa and glimpse a courtyard where servants bustle. On a marble table rests an extravagant centerpiece, a giant loaf shaped into a crown, adorned with sprigs of laurel. Guests murmur in admiration, as though it were a jewel-encrusted tiara instead of, well, flour and water. Bread, a spectacle again. Here's a fact. Roman banquets often ended with the serving of sweetbreads or honeyed rolls. These weren't the ordinary loaves of the street stalls, but carefully crafted luxuries, symbols of wealth and status. To serve elaborate bread was to remind your guests that you could afford not only grain, but also the time and talent to transform it into art. And for the peculiar tidbit, Pliny the Elder once wrote that some Romans flavored bread with ashes of grapevines, claiming it gave the crust a special sharpness. Whether this was culinary innovation or simply a mistake defended with confidence, historians still debate. You imagine some proud baker declaring, "No, no, the burnt taste is intentional," while his guests politely nod, chewing carefully. You continue along the lane, where another baker carries his basket of loaves. He wears no crown now, just sweat on his brow and dust on his arms. The bread crowns, you realize, are for ceremony, but the work is endless. The daily grind doesn't glow in lamplight or inspire poets. It simply feeds people, silently, steadily. Still, you catch glimpses of crowns even here. A small one resting in a shop window, perhaps decorative. A child balancing a crusty ring on her head, giggling before her mother scolds her. The crown may look silly, but it lingers everywhere, a symbol woven into the city's fabric. The sun sinks further. Shadows lengthen, voices quiet. You drift onward, feeling Rome tilt toward evening once again. Bread crowns gleaming faintly in memory like halos made of crust. Night arrives with a softness that makes you slow your steps. Oil lamps flicker to life, and the city's edges blurred. The noise of the day recedes, leaving you with smaller sounds. The shuffle of feet, the distant clink of pottery, the hush of wind against shutters. You pass a modest shrine at a street corner. Offerings rest, their flowers, coins, and to your surprise, a small loaf of bread shaped into a crown. The crust has hardened, more stone than food, but its presence feels tender. Perhaps a baker left it for luck. Perhaps a family offered it in gratitude. The details are lost, like so much of history. Here's a fact. Bread was often used in religious rituals, from sacrifices to offerings at family shrines. It was a bridge between the human and the divine, simple enough to be daily food, sacred enough to carry prayers. The bread crown, then, was not just civic pride, but also a quiet whisper to the gods. We made this with our hands. May you keep us fed. Now, for the odd tidbit, some Romans believed that if you dropped bread on the ground, you should kiss it before picking it up, to avoid bad luck. A superstition that feels oddly familiar, echoing in cultures far beyond Rome. Historians still debate whether this gesture was widespread or just a local quirk, but it's not hard to picture someone bending quickly, whispering an apology to the loaf. You stand before the shrine a while longer, watching the lamp flames tremble in the breeze. The bread crown looks almost holy here, stripped of its comedy, glowing faintly as if it belonged. You walk on, into streets that are hushed now, into Rome that seems almost asleep. Bakers are surely resting too, crowns set aside, ovens cooling. Yet tomorrow, as always, the rhythm will begin a gangrene to flour, flour to bread, bread to crowns, crowns to ceremony. You breathe slowly, your steps gentler, your eyes heavy. The crowns of bread float in your thoughts like soft circles, warm and harmless, looping endlessly like the rhythm of the city itself. Rome settles, and you with it, crumb by crumb into the quiet of night. Dawn once more, soft as a whisper, drapes itself over the rooftops of Rome. The city wakes slowly, with the creak of doors opening and the murmur of voices stretching into the morning. You walk again past familiar streets, past the bakeries where fire is being coaxed alive, past the scent of flour that drifts into the air like dust made holy. The crowns of bread appear one last time stacked neatly on a shelf, waiting for ceremonies that will come and go. One last fact rises like a loaf in the oven. The crowns of bread were more than decoration. They symbolized the dignity of labor, the pride of a trade, the reminder that even in an empire of marble and conquest, daily bread was sacred. A general wore laurel, a baker wore bread. Both were, in their way, victories. And the obscure tidbit, in some later Roman festivals, children were given small bread rings to wear, miniature crowns for small heads, part of games and rituals meant to fold the young into tradition. Historians still debate how common this was, or whether it survived more in story than in practice, but the image is easy to picture. A child giggling, bread crown slipping sideways, unaware of the long line of bakers and loaves stretching behind them into history. You pause, listening to the city stir. Somewhere, a parrot squawks, maybe just in your imagination, about fresh bread. A donkey brays. A boy drags a stick along a wall, making the street sing its sleepy percussion once again. All the details return, circling back, like crumbs forming a trail you've walked before. The crowns of bread are still faintly absurd. Yes, but they are also quietly noble. They remind you that survival itself was once enough for ceremony, that feeding people, day after day, deserved its own crown. The night begins slowly, like honey dripping from a clay pot. You stand in the highlands of Ethiopia, the air thinner than you expect, the stars closer than they've ever dared to be. A faint wind drifts through tall grasses, brushing your ankles as if to say, you probably won't make it through this day awake. That's fine, nobody's timing you. Your ears filled with a steady hum of insects, tiny orchestras practicing without a conductor. Somewhere down the slope, a shepherd whistles at his sheep, though you can't tell whether it's a signal or just boredom. Above you, the sky spreads open, not as a silent painting, but as a resonant chamber. Tonight, you're told, you won't be looking at the stars so much as listening to them, which sounds absurd, but absurdity has its own rhythm here. The elders of this land once believed stars hummed, each with its own tone, like a choir placed so far away you could only sense it in your chest. You're re-standing in a landscape where astronomy was never just eyes and telescopes, but ears pressed into silence, waiting for the universe to murmur. One historical fact to hold on to. By the 4th century, Ethiopia had already developed its own intricate calendar system, one that still doesn't line up neatly with the rest of the world. According to it, the year is something like 7 years behind the Gregorian calendars, so technically, you're younger here. Congratulations, you just got a free time travel facial. A cow coughs somewhere. You smile because even cows sound ancient when you're this far up. The soil crunches under your sandals as you follow a narrow trail to a village that looks stitched together from stone and prayer. The roundhouses with their thatched roofs lean into the earth like they're whispering secrets. Smoke curls from the chimneys in slow ribbons, carrying hints of roasted barley and wood resin. You pass a man squatting near the doorway of one hut, grinding something with a smooth stone. He doesn't look up, and you don't blame him. If you had a task that repetitive, you'd pretend not to notice strangers either. He's preparing tage, a honey wine so sweet it's half drink and half dare. Some say the astronomers drank it before night watches, claiming the buzz helped them tune into celestial vibrations. Historians still debate whether that's a surreal practice or just the world's oldest excuse for drinking at work. Walking further, you spot a small open-air platform where villagers gather. A boy taps a drum softly with his palm, each beat echoing against the hills. The rhythm isn't random, it mirrors a pattern of stars overhead, or so they say. Imagine turning Orion's belt into a baseline. Obscure tidbit for you. In some traditions, people believed certain star tones influenced the growth of teff grain, the tiny seed that becomes Ingra, Ethiopia's spongy bread. The idea that dinner could depend on cosmic percussion feels both poetic and slightly anxieting. You sit with the villagers as the night deepens. No one speaks. The silence itself feels rehearsed, like a liturgy. Then, faintly, you think you hear it, a low, vibrating hum. Maybe it's the wind brushing the acacia branches. Or maybe it's the Milky Way rehearsing for a concert you're not quite sober enough to attend. Either way, your heartbeat sinks to it. For once, you feel less like you're rewatching history and more like you're re-sitting inside its ribcage. Now, let's ease into tonight's journey, letting the hum of unseen stars carry you forward, step by quiet step. Morning comes reluctantly. The sun creeps over the mountains like it had too much honey wine the night before. You rise to the sight of villagers already at work, shoulders bent under baskets of grain, voices trading greetings that sound halfway between laughter and yawns. The stars have gone invisible, but their memory lingers in your ears, like a half-forgotten lullaby. Today, you walk through the village, weaving among goats that seem deeply unimpressed by your presence. Their eyes are side-glancing philosophers, always asking, "Really? That's what you're wearing?" You pass the same man grinding honey near the doorway. Now he's feeding a fire, which snaps and spits like it has opinions. The air is thick with insensitin, resin sweet and sharp, meant to purify both nostrils and spirits. You wonder if this is why historians always describe Ethiopia as layered. It's not just culture, it's smoke. The astronomers you've come to imagine weren't men in white coats, but monks in white cotton robes, draped like clouds caught on their shoulders. Many lived in monasteries carved directly into the stone cliffs of Lalibela, where the silence was so deep you could hear your own blood. One fact stands solid here. Ethiopian Orthodox scholars preserved texts on astronomy and mathematics when much of Europe was busy worrying about nights and plagues. These scholars counted the heavens not just in cycles of the moon, but in tones, pulses, and resonances. You're told of an old practice never written, only whispered, that a monk could sit beside a flowing stream and, by listening to the water's cadence, match it with the hidden rhythm of a star. Imagine that, measuring the cosmos with the same ears you use to detect when a kettle starts boiling. It's both genius and suspiciously convenient. Some researchers today say the story is folklore. Others insist it's an early form of frequency mapping. Scholars still debate whether it was science, mysticism, or just a monk enjoying a riverside nap. You walk toward a field where children are chasing one another, their bare feet drumming against packed earth. The sound overlaps with the hollow clap of woven sandals from passing women balancing clay jars on their heads. Together, it becomes a percussion ensemble more intricate than any concert hall arrangement. The villagers say rhythm teaches patience, and patience, apparently, teaches astronomy. Here's a cultural oddity. Some farmers believed that if you wanted a bumper crop, you had to sing certain notes while planting. Not any tune, but a melody said to correspond with star alignments. If you hummed wrong, you risked angry plants. Imagine forgetting a note and your entire field just deciding, "No, thanks." That's a pressure Spotify playlists have never inflicted. Later in the afternoon, the shade of the trees grows long. You sit under one, feeling your eyelids tugged downward. The goats are still judging you, but more lazily now, like professors at the end of office hours. Across the way, an elder sits cross-legged with a small harp. He plucks it absent-mindedly, tuning each string as though trying to catch the pitch of something higher, farther away. You realize he's not playing for entertainment, he's calibrating, like an instrument, checking itself against the universe. You tilt your head back, remembering the stars from last night, and suddenly you hear them again, not through the air, but through the village itself. The rhythm of feet, the creak of baskets, the sigh of wind. It's not science in the textbook sense, but it is measurement of a kind. You're living inside a sound observatory without walls. Somewhere, a dog barks at nothing. You smile because dogs never respect astronomy, no matter the century. The sky dims again, pulling you softly toward another night, and you realize this isn't about watching or listening. It's about learning to mistake one for the other, until the hum of stars is simply the hum of life. Night drapes itself back across the highlands, the way a shawl settles over an elder's shoulders, and hurried, dignified, inevitable. You climb a rocky path that winds toward a monastery perched on the edge of a cliff. Your legs complain, but softly, like a child too tired to argue. Each step crunches over loose stones, and your breath mingles with the cool mountain air, tasting faintly of juniper smoke. By the time you reach the carved stone gate, the sky is ablaze again, stars as sharp as needles pressed into velvet. This place feels both ancient and impossibly alive, like a cathedral that breathes. Inside, monks in white robes move quietly, carrying clay lamps that paint the walls gold. They say the monasteries of Lalibela were carved, not built, each church hewn directly from living rock. The fact to hold, these 12th century rock-hewn churches still stand, testaments to human stubbornness and divine ambition. Imagine deciding one day, yes, let's carve our prayers straight into the mountain. That seems manageable. A monk nods to you and gestures toward a side chamber. You enter, expecting silence, but instead find a soft, rhythmic chant. The voices rise and fall in perfect unison, as if they've been rehearsing with the stars themselves. The acoustics make the stone walls hum, and you feel vibrations tickle your ribs. Some historians argue that these chants were intentionally pitched to align with star tones the monks claimed to hear, though others dismiss it as coincidence. Scholars still debate whether chanting was a cosmic calibration or simply chanting. On the floor lies a long, flat drum. A monk strikes it gently with a curved stick, the sound low and resonant, like a heartbeat slowed down to half speed. You sit beside him, feeling each pulse like a soft nudge in your spine. He doesn't explain, because he doesn't need to. You already sense the drum is more than percussion, it's a clock. Time measured not in ticks but in thumps. Then comes a curious detail. You notice a painted parchment rolled in the corner. When unrolled, it reveals a calendar not of months or days, but of tonal scales. Notes, mapped against constellations. You think of modern sheet music, and then you think of astrology columns in newspapers, and realize this is somewhere in between horoscope meets symphony. Some passages note that if a child was born under the tone of Vega, they might grow up stubborn, while a tone of Sirius child would laugh too much, which, honestly, sounds like a horoscope you'd almost pay for. The monk offers you a sip of tage, sweet and sticky, reminding you of the man grinding honey the day before. The warmth spreads, and your ears open wider, catching faint echoes from the courtyard, the shuffle of sandals, the murmur of night insects, the sigh of distant winds. Layered together, it almost forms a chord. You wonder if this was the real trick, not literally hearing stars, but training yourself to hear everything at once, until the world itself became a celestial instrument. Somewhere above, an owl calls. You look up instinctively, and the monk chuckles quietly. The bird has its own timing, he tells you without words. Even owls, apparently, are part of the symphony. And in that moment, you stop trying to separate myth from science. You let the hum wash over you, each note a thread in a tapestry too big to unroll. The next morning begins with bells. Not church bells, but handbells rung by monks as they walked through the courtyard. The metal chimes are sharp, clean, almost surgical in the way they slice the dawn air. You blink awake, the sound lodging in your ears like a friendly mosquito that somehow refuses to leave. You follow the monks down to a terrace where the view unfurls across valleys veined with rivers. The fields glisten with dew, and smoke rises from scattered huts like signals sent lazily to the sky. The bells stop ringing, and suddenly you notice a strange silence, not absence of sound, but a silence thick with possibility. One monk points to the horizon, where the sun lifts itself higher. He begins explaining slowly, patiently, how the Ethiopian calendar calculates days, months, and years. Here's your fact. The Ethiopian year has 13 months, 12 with 30 days, and 1 with 5 or 6 depending on leap years. That means their new year falls in September, when bright yellow daisies, called mescal flowers, carpet the hills. You realize you've never envied a calendar before, but this one is smugly beautiful. You walk further, noticing a cluster of small clay vessels arranged in a circle. Each one is filled with water at slightly different levels. A monk taps their rims, and each vessel sings a different note. He explains they use these jars not for music exactly, but as a way of training the ear listening for tones that might match celestial vibrations. It's like a cosmic xylophone, homemade and endlessly patient. You can't help but think of grade school science experiments, except these monks have been running theirs for centuries without ever grading a paper. Now for the odd tidbit. One tradition holds that certain insects could predict star tones better than humans, crickets in particular. If you listened closely, the chirping would speed or slow depending on the alignment of certain constellations. Whether true or not, you make a mental note. If crickets ever replace astronomers, academia is doomed. The monks lead you back toward the village, where children now practice clapping games, each rhythm a tiny puzzle solved with palms. The patterns repeat and expand until they sound suspiciously like coded messages. You wonder if children carried fragments of stellar wisdom without realizing it, hiding astronomy in play. Historians, of course, can't agree. Some say these games evolved independently of spherical sinning. Others claim they're direct echoes of cosmic teachings. Scholars still debate whether laughter was just laughter, or the sky reminding itself how to giggle. By late afternoon, the scent of roasting coffee drifts across the courtyard. Ethiopia, after all, claims coffee as its homeland, and you're not about to argue. A woman roasts green beans over a charcoal fire, the smoke curling like incense. She grinds them by hand and brews the thick, dark liquid in a clay pot. You sip, and suddenly you're awake, in a way the monks' chants never achieved. Perhaps this is the true reason they listen to stars at night without coffee. Who could possibly stay awake long enough to hear them? As evening rolls in, you sit once more beneath the vast bowl of sky. The stars prick the darkness, and you close your eyes, listening. The jars, the crickets, the clapping, the chants, they all hover in your memory. And soon, you can tell if the hum you hear is the cosmos itself, or just your heart trying to keep up. And in that confusion, you finally relax. Because whether science, myth, or sleepy imagination, the result is the same. You are listening to the stars. The night presses down like a heavy quilt, stitched with constellations you can't quite name. You're sitting on a low stone wall outside the monastery, legs dangling, toes brushing cool air. Behind you, the monks are finishing their evening chants, voices fading into something that feels less like music and more like a slow exhale. You glance upward. The stars are brighter here than anywhere you've ever seen, shimmering as if they're leaning closer just to gossip. Someone sits beside you, a young novice, robe too big for his frame, sandals clearly borrowed from someone else. He grins and points skyward. With his finger, he sketches a pattern across the heavens, connecting dots you never would have grouped together. He tells you, in hushed tones, that some constellations aren't just shapes but sounds. Orion's belt hums low, like a drum. The Pleiades whisper sharp, quick notes, like fingers tapping glass. Here's the historical anchor for tonight. Ethiopian scholars developed complex star tables centuries ago, blending Babylonian, Greek, and uniquely local knowledge. These weren't just copied texts, they were reinterpreted, reshaped, and sometimes sung aloud. Imagine your math homework graded on whether you could sing it in key. The novice reaches into his pocket and pulls out a small bell. He rings it once delicate, trembling, and points again to a star. The idea is simple but enchanting. Ring until you find a tone that feels like it fits. You try, though your hand is clumsy. The bell trembles off pitch. He giggles, not cruelly, just kindly, as if to say, "Don't worry, the stars aren't offended." A curious tidbit. Some villagers believed that sleeping in a certain position, head pointed toward a particular star, could improve your dreams. Lie wrong, and you risk nightmares, or just very boring dreams. Tonight, you wonder which star your head points to, and whether that explains the bizarre images of dancing goats that keep flashing through your mind. You ask the novice whether he truly hears stars, or if it's metaphor. He shrugs, unconcerned, and says in a mix of broken phrases, both, maybe, enough. Scholars still debate whether statements like this represent deep philosophy or simply an efficient way to end arguments. Later, a monk joins you, carrying a lyre-like cry. He strums gently, and the melody fills the air like warm smoke. The novice hums along, his voice weaving between strings. You notice something startling. The notes seem to echo the sky itself, like constellations mapped into melody. Is it deliberate or coincidence? You'll never know. But the effect is hypnotic. A donkey brays in the distance, shattering the atmosphere. You both laugh. Even donkeys, it seems, demand to be part of the celestial orchestra. The night deepens. You feel the mountain itself humming beneath you, as if the entire earth has joined the song. You rest your head back, eyelids heavy, and think, perhaps the trick isn't that they heard stars it's s, that they never assumed silence was empty. Dawn rises like spilled gold across the highlands. You wake to find yourself still on the stone wall, neck stiff, sandals dusty. The novice is gone, but the cra still leans against the wall, left as if trusting you to guard it. You stretch, bones clicking like old door hinges, and wander toward the village below. Smoke curls from cook fires. Women squat over grinding stones, crushing roasted barley into flour. The sound is rhythmic, steady, almost like a heartbeat. You notice how the cadence matches the morning chants you heard last night. The thought makes you smile. Bread making as cosmic rehearsal. Here's your fact for this section. Ethiopian scholars once used the star Sirius as a marker for agricultural cycles, noting its rising as a signal for planting. Much like the ancient Egyptians, they tied stellar observation directly to survival. In short, farming by starlight wasn't poetic, it was practical. Which makes you wonder why your houseplants still die under LED bulbs. A villager waves you over to a courtyard where men are preparing oxen for plowing. The beasts move slowly, with the resigned patience of creatures who know this routine far too well. A boy sings as he ties rope around the oxen's horns, his tune bright and repetitive. When you ask, someone explains that singing keeps the animals calm, but also aligns the work with celestial rhythms. Apparently, plowing to the wrong tone could anger the soil. It's agriculture, with a built-in soundtrack, centuries before Spotify's focus and productivity playlist. Now for the odd tidbit. Some records suggest certain farmers claim their oxen could hear the stars better than humans, pulling the plow straighter when Sirius rose. No one knows if this was faith, folklore, or just clever branding to avoid blame when crops failed. Scholars still debate whether the oxen were genuinely considered cosmic collaborators or simply stubborn animals. You wander past fields into a small grove of eucalyptus trees. The air smells sharp, medicinal, like someone left menthol cough drops everywhere. Beneath one tree, an elder sits with a reed flute. He plays slowly, breathy notes that weave through the branches. Each phrase rises, then pauses, as if waiting for the trees to answer. And sometimes, you think they do. The wind rustles leaves in uncanny rhythm, like applause too polite to interrupt. You sit cross-legged nearby, letting the sound wash over you. The elder pauses, points skyward, and resumes. You realize his music isn't random. He's matching the rising sun's position with changing tones. It dawns on you literally that this is astronomy disguised as song. A goat ambles past, chewing on something that looks suspiciously like your sandal strap. You shoo it gently, and it stares back with its usual philosopher's disdain. The goat, clearly, is unimpressed by cosmic symphonies. The day grows warmer, cicadas start in their relentless buzz. But instead of annoyance, you hear them now as part of the orchestra, filling in higher notes where the flute trails off. You think back to the novice's shrug. Both, maybe, enough. And for once, that's all the explanation you need. By evening, the sky turns a deep bruised purple, clouds drifting like slow caravans across the horizon. You're invited to a gathering near the edge of the village, where a circle of people sits around a small fire. Sparks jump upward, like tiny stars that forgot their lines and stumbled onto the wrong stage. The air smells of roasted grain and faint honey. More tej. Apparently, astronomy and fermented beverages are close colleagues here. An elder begins to speak. His voice is gravelly, but the cadence is deliberate, pulling you along like a river current. He tells the story of a time when the stars spoke directly to humans in tones clear enough to guide them through darkness. Over centuries, people forgot how to listen. Only the monks, with their chants and flutes and jars of water, kept fragments of that old language. He pauses dramatically, stirs the fire with a stick, and adds, "Or maybe people just got lazy." You appreciate the honesty. Here's a firm fact to hang on to. The Ethiopian Book of Enoch, ancient Jewish text preserved most fully in the Ge'ez language, contains detailed passages on the movements of heavenly bodies. Ethiopia became one of the only places where the text survived intact, offering scholars today glimpses of how early civilizations blended astronomy and theology. It's like finding your ancestors' notebook and realizing half the doodles were advanced math. The elder gestures toward the fire. Another man begins beating a hand drum, steady and soft. The rhythm echoes what you felt last night in the monastery, that heartbeat of the earth itself. One by one, people join in clapping, humming, stamping their feet lightly. The sounds pile together until the night feels less like a backdrop and more like a resonant chamber. Then comes the odd tidbit. Some villagers insist that fire itself has a tone, a kind of humming resonance if you listen close enough. Certain flames, they believe, harmonize with specific stars. Tonight, you lean in, hearing the crackle of wood and the occasional whistle of escaping sap. And yes, maybe, or maybe it's just fire being fire. Scholars still debate whether this belief was ever widespread or simply a poetic metaphor repeated too many times. You find yourself clapping along, though offbeat. The child beside you laughs, correcting your rhythm by tugging your wrist into place. It feels less like astronomy now, and more like family, a reminder that sky watching was some distant academic pursuit, but woven into ordinary evenings. Firelight and laughter. The music builds, then softens, then fades altogether. The group lapses into silence, but it's not empty. It's the silence of a sky so bright with stars that you can almost believe they are leaning down, listening back. You close your eyes, the fire's warmth brushing your cheeks, and you realize this is astronomy as lullaby, sung not to you but with you. Morning arrives with a burst of sound, roosters crowing, donkeys braying, children shouting. It's less a sunrise and more a chaotic orchestra tuning before a show. You stumble from your blanket, hair askew, eyes squinting against the golden light. Down by the riverbank, you see women washing clothes, slapping wet fabric against smooth stones. The rhythmic smacks echo across the water, oddly satisfying, like percussion lessons no one signed up for. You lean on a rock and listen, realizing once again, the line between daily life and cosmic rhythm is razor-thin here. Your historical anchor for this morning. In Ethiopian tradition, the star Canopa's second brightest in the night sky was sometimes used as a navigational marker, particularly in the southern regions where it shines low on the horizon. Its appearance meant travel could resume after long rainy seasons. A star as compass, guiding both caravans and farmers. You wonder how many people today would get lost walking from the couch to the fridge without GPS. Nearby, a boy crouches beside the river with a hollow reed. He dips one end in the water, blows across the top, and produces a low, mournful note. He grins at you proudly. It sounds suspiciously like the hum you thought you heard in the monastery. Maybe this is the trick. Copy the world until the cosmos itself joins in. Now for the curious tidbit. Some oral traditions say crocodiles could sense star vibrations, not by looking. Obviously, crocodiles aren't known for stargazing, but through their bodies, lying half submerged in water. If true, it would make them the universe's grumpiest astronomers. Whether fact or colorful exaggeration, scholars still debate how literally to take these tales. You wander a priver, where a small group of monks sit with parchment, sketching symbols you half recognize, stars arranged in grids, notes scrawled like musical shorthand. One explains they are copying older manuscripts, ensuring the knowledge survives. You notice the ink stains on his fingers, the same way a modern student might carry coffee stains on their notes. Knowledge always leaves a mess. The monks pause at midday, spreading flatbread and lentils on cloth. They gesture for you to join. The meal is simple, earthy, and eaten with hands, each tear of bread folded into a small scoop. Between bites, someone hums a low tone. Another answers, higher. Soon they're layering harmonies over lunch, as casually as others might trade jokes. You chew slowly, half amused, half entranced. Who knew astronomy could double as mealtime entertainment? The sun arcs high, glaring off the river's surface. You lean back against a tree, full and drowsy, eyelids heavy. The reed's mournful note drifts back from the buoy by the water. You're not sure if it's practice or performance anymore. Your body relaxes, your thoughts blur, and once again you feel it. The stars, unseen in the daylight, humming somewhere just out of reach. The night returns like velvet drawn across the highlands, stitched with patterns too sharp to ignore. You're sitting near a terraced field, the air damp with the scent of earth that has been turned all day by plows and songs. The stars are out in full force, shimmering like gossiping neighbors across a dark fence. A young farmer kneels beside you, holding a small clay pot filled with water. He sets it down carefully, like a priest offering sacrifice, and waits until the surface stills. Then he points upward at a particularly bright star and gestures for you to lean close. You do, though the ground is cold against your knees. At first, you see only your own warped reflection. Then, faintly, the star above flickers on the water's skin. He explains that in his family, generations used water bowls to listen to the stars. Not by sound exactly, but by watching ripples, reflections, and the faint vibration of the surface when stirred by air or insect wings. It was said the water carried the tones of the heavens down to earth. Historical fact here: across parts of Ethiopia, reflective surfaces bowls of water, polished metal were indeed used for both divination and practical stargazing, a portable night sky mirror, much cheaper than building an observatory. The farmer hums softly, then taps the rim of the pot. The vibration ripples outward, blurring the star's reflection. He grins. Now the star sings. You're not sure whether to be impressed or gently suspicious. But the sound does seem to resonate longer than you'd expect, as if the pot and the night air agreed on a secret. And here's your curious tidbit. Some families believed mosquitoes could translate the stars. Their whining buzz a clue to whether a harvest would be abundant, which makes you wonder, were the villagers enduring bites in the name of science, or just desperately looking for excuses to explain mosquito season? Scholars still debate whether insects were genuinely considered collaborators or merely unavoidable nuisances. You tilt your head, listening. The night feels, layered crickets, distant bells, the rustle of dry grass. Together, they create a hum you can almost convince yourself belongs to the stars. Almost. A donkey brays nearby, badly off-key, dragging you back to Earth. Apparently, not every creature in the village got the memo about cosmic harmony. You laugh quietly, but the farmer doesn't mind. He pours the water back into the soil, pats the pot like a friend, and says something you only half catch. The stars do not mind laughter, and maybe that's the truest line you've heard all evening. You lie back against the ground, staring upward. The earth feels warm, the sky impossibly wide, and you realize, maybe star listening isn't about perfect accuracy. Maybe it's about making the world feel less silent, less indifferent. A song hummed back at the universe, hoping it hums in return. The morning breaks with gold spilling across the terraces, each beam catching on dew like thousands of tiny prisms. You wander through the village, yawning, the ground still damp beneath your sandals. Everywhere you look, life is already in rhythm. Women grinding grain, men tying oxen, children laughing as though their lungs were designed purely for percussion. You're drawn to the church courtyard, where monks are laying out instruments for some kind of lesson. Small harps, flutes, and drums sit in neat rows. A group of boys gather, cross-legged, while a tall monk gestures for quiet. He begins plucking a cra, each note crisp and deliberate. The boys echo him, some close, some hilariously off. The monk smiles anyway, nodding as though every mistake is part of the plan. Your historical anchor, Ethiopia's musical notation system, known as melaquet, dates back centuries. While not as formalized as Western notation, it organized chants into modes that were tied to seasons, prayers, and sometimes even celestial cycles. Imagine a world where sheet music doubles as an almanac. That's the stage these boys are stepping into. One boy taps his drum a little too enthusiastically, startling a nearby goat, which bolts across the courtyard. Everyone laughs. The monk doesn't scold. Instead, he points skyward, then back to the drum. The stars are not always gentle either, he says. A cosmic burn, softly delivered. Now for the obscure tidbit. There was once a belief that echoes in certain stone courtyards carried hidden star tones. By clapping or drumming, monks claimed they could discover resonances missed by the naked ear. Some even argued that the stones themselves had memorized ancient celestial songs. Scholars still debate whether this was mysticism or the world's earliest attempt at sound engineering. The boys continue, clapping and chanting. Slowly, their chaos merges into coherence. You begin to hear it, not just music, but a cadence that feels aligned, as though the courtyard has become a miniature cosmos, each child a planet, orbiting in rhythm. You sit back against a wall, letting the sounds wash over you. The sun climbs higher, the air warming, but you don't feel heavy. You feel tuned like an instrument someone finally strung correctly. And just as you close your eyes, a rooster crows at the absolute wrong moment, loud and graceless. You laugh despite yourself. Apparently, no orchestra is complete without a diva. You exhale, slow and easy, realizing that in this world, astronomy isn't separate from life. It's woven into every drumbeat, every echo, every accidental rooster solo. And for the first time, you stop trying to separate science from song. You simply let them blend. Evening falls like warm ink spilled across parchment. You wander away from the village, following a winding path up a slope where tall grasses sway like tired dancers. At the crest, you find a flat plateau where a small group has gathered: men, women, children, all sitting in a loose circle. The air feels thick with anticipation, though nothing has started yet. It's as though the sky itself is part of the audience. At the center of the circle sits an elder woman with hair silver as moonlight. She cradles a bajina, massive 10-stringed harp, known in Ethiopia as the Harp of David. Her fingers hover, then pluck a string, the sound deep and resonant, like a heartbeat slowed into eternity. The note vibrates through the ground, up your spine, and lingers long after it fades. Here's a solid fact. The bajina has been played in Ethiopia for centuries, especially during fasting seasons. Its solemn tones associated with prayer and meditation, but in some traditions, its resonance was also linked to the Starzan instrument, so low and droning it was said to echo the universe's own foundation. The woman plays slowly, each note like a pebble dropped into still water. The listeners close their eyes, some swaying slightly. You notice children pressing their ears to the ground, as if waiting to feel the earth hum back. Perhaps they will, perhaps they won't. Scholars still debate whether this practice was intended as genuine astronomy or just an imaginative extension of sacred music. And then comes a peculiar tidbit. Certain villagers whispered that the bajina's lowest note could calm storms if played long enough. Others claimed it could drive hyenas away from fields. Whether the stars endorsed this, no one agrees, but it certainly makes for an entertaining mental picture. A harp versus a pack of hyenas. The music continues, hypnotic, weighty. You lean back on your elbows, staring at the sky. One by one, stars ignite across the heavens, each sharp, each insistent. The harp drones below, grounding them, like a bass line anchoring a melody you can't quite hum. A child giggles suddenly, breaking the spell, and the woman laughs too, never missing a note. The sound is softer now, playful, the sky above twinkling in sympathy. You realize that the border between solemnity and laughter here is thin like parchment stretched over a drum. Both are needed, both belong. The harp's final note hangs in the air long enough to feel eternal. When silence falls, it isn't empty. It's charged, like the pause between lightning and thunder. You sit with it, letting your breath slow, and you think, maybe listening to stars is less about sound and more about waiting. Waiting until silence itself begins to sing. Dawn slips in quietly, soft as a cat on padded feet. You wake in the same plateau where you dozed off. The grass is heavy with dew, your robe sticking damply to your shoulders. The villagers are gone, but the imprint of their circle remains in the flattened grass. The bajina's deep hum still lingers in your chest, ghostly but persistent. You walk downhill, back toward the river. Mist curls above the water, and the early light paints everything gold, as though the world has been dipped in honey. On the bank, you find two monks crouched over parchment, sketching patterns. You peer closer and see not words but spirals, grids, dots like constellations tangled into geometry. One monk looks up, squints and shrugs as if to say, "We're not explaining this before coffee. Your historical fact." Medieval Ethiopian manuscripts often combined astronomy, astrology, and theology, weaving diagrams that mapped stars alongside liturgical calendars. Some pages look like mathematical puzzles, others like musical scores. Whether they were scientific tools or devotional artwork, both remains uncertain. Scholars still debate how literally these diagrams were meant to function. The monks gesture for you to sit. They pull out a string stretched between two sticks, adjusting its tension and plucking it lightly. Each adjustment changes the pitch. They hum in response, nodding when the note feels right. You realize they're testing ratios tones against tones, perhaps echoing Pythagoras without ever reading him. It's music, but it's also measurement. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some monks believed certain ratios of sound could heal parchment, keeping manuscripts from decay. They would chant as they worked, convinced the vibration blessed the page itself. Whether or not it helped the ink, it probably made the task less boring. The sun climbs higher, and the mist burns away. A group of children arrives, splashing in the water, their laughter ringing bright. One monk frowns, but only for a moment. Soon he's humming in rhythm with their shouts. You catch yourself smiling. Everything becomes part of the same score: hearing, strings, chants, and play. Later, you sit under a eucalyptus tree with a clay cup of coffee, strong and dark. The taste anchors you as the day warms. Across the river, you hear a faint flute and the answering buzz of cicadas. You close your eyes, sipping slowly. It hits you again. This is a world where no sound is wasted, where every hum, every buzz, every off-key rooster is woven into the universe's ongoing rehearsal. And you tired content, coffee sterned your part of the choir now too. The sun dips low, the highlands glowing like embers left at the bottom of a hearth. You wander into the village square, where preparations for an evening festival are underway. Strips of cloth, dyed bright with natural pigments, flutter from poles. The scent of roasted chickpeas drifts through the air, mixing with incense and wood smoke. Everyone seems busy, but no one seems hurried. At the center, a group of women kneel in a semicircle, grinding spices with stone mortar. The rhythmic pounding syncs up so neatly it feels intentional. And maybe it is because here, rhythm is never only rhythm. Tonight's fact to anchor you: Ethiopia celebrates Mezcal, the finding of the true cross, with bonfires that blaze across the hills. The timing of this celebration has long been tied not just to Christian tradition, but also to solar alignment, the bonfire lighting up at the equinox. Astronomy and theology intertwined, fire is both ritual and calendar. As twilight deepens, villagers gather around a tall pile of wood and brush. Someone sets it alight, flames rushing upward, sparks scattering like fragments of new constellations. You step back from the heat, your face flushed, your heart thudding faster than you'd like to admit. The fire roars, and people begin singing a layered chant, call and response, weaving old prayers with laughter. Now for the odd tidbit. Some say the direction in which the bonfire's central pole falls predicts fortune for the coming year. If it leans north, rains will be generous. South, the crops may fail. East means prosperity. West warns of trouble. The sky gets the last word, and fire is the translator. Scholars still debate whether this was genuine meteorological practice or just a very elaborate excuse for bonfire parties. As the singing swells, you notice children circling the fire, clapping hands in rapid patterns. Their rhythms rise above the crackle, matching the pulse of the flames. For a moment, the sound seems less like music and more like calibration humans tuning themselves to light. You tilt your head back, watching smoke funnel toward the stars. For a flicker of time, it looks like the fire is trying to join them, as if the earth itself has decided it wants a seat in the orchestra tonight. Someone nudges you, offering a clay cup of tea. It's sweet, sticky, strong. You sip, cough lightly, and grin. Maybe the stars do hum, but honey wine makes them easier to hear. The morning after the festival is quieter than usual, as though the whole village is nursing a collective hangover, though no one admits it out loud. Chickpea husks and bits of charred wood litter the square. A faint scent of smoke clings to your clothes, as if the bonfire has followed your home. You walk toward the fields, where dew still clings to blades of grass. A farmer stands watching the horizon, lips moving silently. You edge closer, and he explains. He's listening for the aftersound of the stars. Some believe that after a great fire, the heavens answered not with light, but with resonance. The fields, the soil, the air itself carry the echo. Your historical note for today: Ethiopia's royal chronicles mention celestial events, eclipses, comets, unusual star patterns, sometimes interpreted as omens for harvests or battles. The line between astronomy and prophecy blurred constantly, with the court scribes recording both in the same ink. Imagine mixing your horoscope with your weather forecast and your military report, all in one neat paragraph. Nearby, two women spread grain on woven mats to dry as they toss handfuls into the air. The seeds patter down like tiny drums. One begins humming, the other joins, their voices lilting as naturally as breathing. The rhythm becomes so steady it feels rehearsed, but it isn't. It's just life syncing itself to work. Here, S, the curious tidbit. There, S, a local saying that if you hum the wrong tone while winnowing grain, you'll invite sparrows to steal more than usual. Whether sparrows actually have musical taste is debatable, but it's a charming theory. Scholars still debate whether these sayings were meant literally or simply as playful reminders to stay attentive. You sit on a rock, watching the process. The air fills with glints of sunlight bouncing off tossed kernels, like miniature stars raining down. You realize you've stopped trying to draw the line between myth and practicality. What difference does it make if a tune keeps sparrows away or just keeps farmers awake? Both are victories. A breeze stirs, carrying faint notes from someone's flute in the distance. It mingles with the sound of seeds, with the hum of women's voices, with the whisper of grass. And there it is again, that layered hum, the one you've been chasing since your first night here. Not from stars directly, but from everything they touch. You close your eyes, letting the sound wrap around you, and for a moment, you think, maybe the universe doesn't want you to choose between science and song. Maybe it just wants you to listen, long enough, until silence turns melodic. Night, again. The final one. The air is cool and still, as though the highlands are holding their breath. You sit on a hillside overlooking the village, the stone houses glowing faintly from within, each doorway lit by a single flame. The sky is unreasonably clear, stars flung across it in such abundance that it feels almost crowded. Below, the monks begin their chants. You've heard them before, but tonight they sound different, slower, deeper, as though gravity itself is singing. The cadence seeps into the ground, through the grass, into your chest. You close your eyes, not because you're instructed to, but because it feels natural. The hum surrounds you. Here's your last solid anchor. For centuries, Ethiopian scholars didn't separate disciplines the way modern universities do. Astronomy, theology, music, and agriculture all lived under one roof of understanding. The stars weren't distant objects, but part of daily life, woven into prayer and bread, into laughter and silence. They listened, not because it was strange, but because it was obvious. The world speaks if you stop insisting it's mute. A stray thought wanders into your head. Maybe you've been listening all along. Every goat's bray, every child's clap, every misplaced rooster solo. They weren't interruptions, but verses. The cosmos hides in plain sound. Here is the curious tidbit to close with. Some villagers once said that when you finally learn to hear the stars clearly, you won't want to tell anyone. Not because it's secret, but because the language is too obvious. Like explaining laughter. Scholars, of course, still debate whether that was philosophy or just the ultimate excuse to nap outdoors. The chants soften. A flute rises somewhere below, its notes weaving gently through the night air. The fireflies flicker in the grass around you, pulsing in time. Or maybe you just imagine it. You lean back against the earth, eyelids heavy, body loose. And now, the wind down. The stars blur at the edges as your breathing slows. The chants below sink into a steady drone, like a mother's hum drifting over a cradle. You feel the hillside under you, steady, patient, holding all the weight you've carried. Above, the constellations no longer demand to be named. They simply glow, indifferent to categories. The air tastes faintly of smoke and honey, of earth and eucalyptus. Each breath a reminder that you are part of this orchestra too. Even if you've never learned the notes, your thoughts stretch out, lengthening like shadows at dusk, softer, slower. The sounds of the village blur into a single rhythm, footsteps fading, a dog barking once, a goat shifting in its sleep. Even the silence has texture now, a gentle vibration that wraps you in warmth. You remember the first night, the hum you thought might have been imagination. Tonight, you know it doesn't matter. Whether stars truly sing or not, the listening itself has been enough. Enough to soften the edges of the day, enough to steady the restless pulse of your own heart. The night sky presses closer, immense but tender, a canopy vast enough to cradle every story, every rhythm, every dream. The chants drift further, dissolving into the dark, until they are no more than a whisper. The stars remain, patient, eternal, humming their quiet hymn, and you drift with them, carried on the low, endless tone of the universe, easing into sleep as the highlands exhale. The night is soft and strangely eternal. You stand on a dimly lit street in ancient China, the air thick with the smell of cooking fires and damp stone. The lanterns sway, as if they too are struggling to stay awake. A faint rhythm fills the air, not music, not footsteps, but water. Drop after drop, it plinks into a basin somewhere inside a scholar's quiet chamber. Time itself is dripping, slow and unhurried, as if it knows you're barely keeping your eyes open. Consider this your warning. You probably won't make it through this day. You walk toward the sound, guided by curiosity and the promise that even if you don't understand the heavens, someone here has already tried to measure them. The scholar's house is plain whitewashed walls, a roofline of dark tiles, the faint squeak of a cricket insisting it's more important than it is. The door opens, not with ceremony, but with resignation, as though houses in this city have long since accepted that strangers wander in to learn things. Inside, you find him bent over a vessel of bronze, eyes narrowed as though he can coax obedience from water. He cannot. Nobody can. The vessel is a clepsydra, a water clock, a simple idea really, a bowl with a small hole, drip by drip, emptying into another container. You measure the hours not by shadows or stars, but by patient listening. The scholar adjusts a wooden float that rises as the lower container fills, and you realize time here is not a loud announcement, but a soft gurgle. This system dates back thousands of years, even before your sleepy stroll tonight. Records suggest the Chinese used them as early as the Shang dynasty, around 1600 BC. Imagine a king, solemn and divine, secretly checking whether dinner is late by peering at a bucket. It isn't perfect. The water drips faster in summer, slower in winter, rebellious against uniformity. Scholars tinkered with designs for centuries, creating ever more elaborate vessels, scales, and siphons. But here, in this modest chamber, the clock is little more than a controlled leak with delusions of grandeur. You feel the irony sink in. The empire measures eternity, one drop at a time. A neighbor's rooster crows prematurely, mocking the concept of standardized time. You glance at the scholar, who sighs as though every rooster is a personal insult. He jots notes with a brush, recording how many ladles of water are needed to survive the night's observations. Somewhere in the silence, you hear him mutter about accuracy. Historians still debate whether early Chinese officials trusted these clocks for official business, or treated them more like novelty desk toys for the academically obsessed. You notice an odd custom. Nearby, a child leans on the wall, reciting lines from poetry, each verse timed with a drip. Some families used water clocks for teaching children, memorizing classics not by a ringing bell, but by how long it took the bowl to empty. Imagine being told, you can stop once the bucket runs dry. It sounds less like a lesson, more like a dare. Your own eyelids lower, tempted by the hypnotic rhythm. The scholar lifts the float again, annoyed, as if he, too, could fall asleep mid-measurement. But no, he persists, convinced that by mastering water, he masters time itself. You let your breath slow, almost in sync with the dripping, and though the rooster cackles outside like an unpaid alarm clock, you decide this is the right pace for tonight. Now, let's ease into tonight's journey. You sit down beside the bronze vessel, your hand brushing against its cool surface. The room smells faintly of ink and boiled millet, not unpleasant but far from inspiring. The scholar ignores you, absorbed in the water's rhythm, though occasionally he sighs loud enough to remind you that genius often doubles as a form of irritation. He gestures toward the float, explaining without words that this little wooden disc is his closest friend. It rises faithfully, unlike students, neighbors, or family members who insist on interrupting him with real life. With a thin rod attached to the float, he marks lines against a tall board, each notch representing a passing interval. The board looks suspiciously like the back of a wardrobe, and you suspect he repurposed it when no one was looking. Here lies the major fact of the evening. By the Han Dynasty 206 BCA Das Sedose, water clocks became sophisticated enough to be officially used by astronomers. Entire nights were devoted to observing stars while the water whispered in the background, allowing them to align calendars with both heavens and bureaucracy. A miscalculated drop could mean the emperor's ritual was performed latent, when the emperor believes he communes with the cosmos. Being late is not an option, but tonight is quieter than politics. You tilt your head toward the scholar's brushwork. He is sketching a small diagram beside his notes. Strangely enough, he's doodled a turtle. You'll later learn that in some corners of China, water clocks were decorated with turtle motifs, the animal being a symbol of longevity and cosmic order. It is said that some scholars even believed the dripping water echoed the turtle's slow heartbeat, although you suspect this was a creative excuse for why the clock always seemed to run slow. The drops continue, uneven but steady enough, like someone chewing thoughtfully in another room. You think of modern clocks with their aggressive ticking, shouting seconds into existence, while here the universe whispers them into being. It's less of a countdown, more of a suggestion. You begin to understand why sleep comes so easily in this world. Still, nothing is flawless. The scholar leans close to the bowl, squinting as if scolding it into dripping properly. He mutters something about temperature, perhaps about the diameter of the hole, perhaps about fate itself. Scholars still debate whether such muttering was part of the method, or merely the inevitable side effect of working with dripping water for decades. Either way, you're grateful he doesn't try to explain the math though. Given the expression on his face, he might try if you stay too long. And then comes the cultural oddity. Apparently, in some households, people used water clocks, not just for timekeeping, but also for timing tea. Imagine this: instead of a dainty sandglass or a smartphone app, someone mutters, "Steep the leaves until the float rises to notches." It's both practical and dangerously easy to forget, especially if you start napping between drips. Tea either turns out perfect or as bitter as your scholar friend's sighs. You lean back, listening half in this century, half drifting somewhere softer. Outside, you hear the faint thump of a night guard making his rounds, tapping a wooden clapper to announce the hour. His time is measured by his footsteps and duty, yours by a stubborn bucket. Two worlds, equally unreliable, meeting in the same night. Your eyes grow heavier as the scholar replaces the float yet again. He seems determined, almost heroic, though you suspect history will remember him less as a conqueror and more as someone who spent too much time fixing leaks. Still, there is a tenderness in it, the belief that even small drips matter, that eternity can be measured by patience. And in that thought, you feel yourself letting go, sinking into the rhythm that has marked centuries, wondering faintly if the turtle on the page is still swimming forward, one drop at a time. The night lingers, soft as silk, and the scholar's chamber grows warmer with the steady exhale of the oil lamp. The air smells faintly of charred wick, inkstone, and the metallic temps of water on bronze. You shift on the woven mat, your body lulled into stillness by the unrelenting drip. Each drop echoes with more importance than it deserves, like the exaggerated cough of an actor waiting for applause. The scholar clears his throat and gestures at the clock again, proud in the way someone might show off a pet that only occasionally obeys commands. You realize the float has risen noticeably since you first sat down. It bobs with a faint smugness, as though mocking your drowsy pace. With great ceremony, the scholar marks the board again. Time has passed, not quickly, not efficiently, but undeniably. Here is the next great fact. During the Tang dynasty, 618 to 907 CE, water clocks became so important that they were installed in government offices. Officials relied on them for administrative duties, keeping records, and scheduling ceremonies. Imagine the civil servants of Chang'an adjusting their hats, straightening their scrolls, and anxiously waiting for a drip to give them permission to leave work. You suddenly realize bureaucracy has always been boring, no matter the century. A servant slips quietly into the room carrying a tray of dried plums. He sets them down without fuss, then eyes the clock with mild disapproval, as though silently accusing it of wasting everyone's time. You take a plum anyway, chewing slowly, because here food is just another way of waiting. Somewhere in the shadows, a cricket chirps again, slightly offbeat from the drip, like an amateur percussionist in a village parade. An odd tidbit emerges as the scholar resumes his muttering. Apparently, some scholars would sing or chant verses while working with water clocks, using their voice as a kind of auxiliary measurement. The idea was that the rhythm of a poem could compensate for the irregularity of dripping water. Of course, this assumes you can chant steadily without nodding off midline. It also assumes that your neighbors don't mind hearing you repeat the same 4 verses about moonlight for 7 hours straight. The scholar demonstrates by humming, though his tune sounds suspiciously like someone forgot the melody halfway through. You nod politely, the way one does when a relative insists on performing at dinner. Scholarly uncertainty, however, sneaks into the room. Historians are not entirely sure whether these chanting practices were widespread or just eccentric quirks of individual scholars. It is possible the humming was more for staying awake than for scientific accuracy. You feel inclined to believe the latter, because honestly, it makes more sense. The drops continue, arrogant in their persistence, until you lose track of how many have fallen. The float rises, marking a new interval, and the scholar beams as though he invented time itself. You don't have the heart to tell him it existed before his bucket. Instead, you breathe slowly, syncing with the rhythm, your body surrendering inch by inch to the inevitability of slumber. And then, just as you settle, a gust of wind rattles the shutters. The scholar freezes, suspicious, as though the elements have conspired against his experiment. He sets a weight on the window ledge to keep it still, muttering about how one should measure water, not air. You can't help but think. Perhaps history is just a series of people grumbling about things outside their control. The oil lamp flickers lower, the room falling into deeper shadow. You taste the last of the plum, dry and tart, and close your eyes. The drip continues, like a lullaby written by someone who only knew one note. Time, it seems, is endless. By now, you are half dreaming, which feels appropriate for a story about time that refuses to hurry. The scholar, however, remains vigilant, perched like a crane over his dripping basin. He scratches notes onto bamboo slips with the careful precision of a man who knows posterity is watching or, at least, hopes it will someday. You look around the chamber, noticing details you missed earlier, the shelves lined with scrolls, the faint carvings on the wooden beams, a jar of pickled radish sitting inexplicably close to the inkstone. Daily life here is not grand. It is practical, cluttered, endlessly ordinary. Perhaps that is the true secret of ancient scholarship, not divine wisdom, but knowing how to share a room with both poetry and vegetables. And here comes the fact of this section. By the Song Dynasty 962-1279 CE, water clocks had grown into elaborate towers. Some even incorporated wheels, gears, and astronomical instruments. The most famous belonged to Susong, a polymath who built a massive clock tower in the 11th century, complete with a rotating celestial globe. His invention combined dripping water with mechanical achievements, making it one of the earliest known examples of a mechanical clock. Imagine a skyscraper of wood and bronze, its heartbeat a steady drip. All so the emperor could know when to have lunch on time. But tonight, you are far from Susong's grand tower. You are still in this smaller room, where a single bowl feels more than enough. The scholar glances at you as if to say, "Don't even think about falling asleep yet." You nod, but your eyelids betray you. The dripping doesn't care. It has no loyalty, no intention of entertaining you. It just exists, stubborn and eternal. Then comes the cultural oddity of the evening. In some regions, people believed that listening too long to a water clock could make you melancholic. The endless dripping was thought to weigh on the spirit, pulling you into sadness. Some even warned children not to nap beside one, fearing they might wake with strange dreams or heavy hearts. You smile faintly at this, because clearly, no one ever considered that sadness might simply come from spending 7 hours staring at a leaking pot. Historians still debate whether such beliefs were widespread superstitions or just fragments of local lore, recorded once and then exaggerated. You lean toward believing them, because after a few hours here, you, too, feel like sighing more often than usual. The scholar, however, seems immune. He watches the float rise again and marks the board with a satisfied grunt. This is his music, his faith, his devotion. He lives in a world where eternity is not an abstract idea but a puddle slowly forming under a table. You can't decide whether this is beautiful or mildly absurd. Probably both. Outside, the night guard passes again, his clapper echoing against stone. You realize that two systems of time are running in parallel. The official clapper outside, the private drip inside. Neither is perfect. Both are strangely human. You stretch, feeling the mat rustle under you, and the scholar finally spares you a glance of pity. He offers a cup of tea, steeped long enough to be bitter, timed not by leaves but by drips. You sip, grimace, and pretend it's perfect. He nods, satisfied. You realize he is timing everything tonight, even your politeness. The drip continues, steady and tireless. You close your eyes again, knowing that whether you listen or not, time will go on dripping, indifferent to your sleepiness. And that, in itself, feels like the gentlest kind of freedom. Morning does not arrive with a jolt here. It seeps in slowly, like steam from a kettle, pale light slipping through the shutters, coloring the scholar's chamber in soft grays. The oil lamp has burned itself out, leaving only the faint smell of its smoke. The water clock, however, has not stopped. It never stops. It is still there, quietly insistent, still dripping, still proving that even when everyone else gives up for the night, gravity and patience will keep working. The scholar stirs his stiff shoulders, scribbles one more mark on the board, and finally sighs with something close to relief. He has survived another cycle of night without missing a single interval. You, on the other hand, have been drifting in and out, lulled into a state that might count as sleep, or might just be resignation. Either way, you're softer now, less restless. This is when he explains half to you, half to himself, that the real challenge is not measuring time but convincing others to trust your measurement. The float might rise, the marks might align, but a farmer down the road still insists that dawn is whenever his rooster yells. An emperor demands exactitude, but the common baker just wants to know when his dough has risen. You realize every civilization has its private definitions of too early and too late. Here comes your historical anchor. In the Tang dynasty, water clocks were paired with official night watches, divided into 5 zheng. Each zheng marked a 2-hour span, and it was the responsibility of watchmen to beat drums or gongs to announce each one. The water clock gave them their cue. So while the scholar here mutters over drips, out in the streets, men with sticks and gongs decide when whole households turn in or wake. It's a strange teamwork. The scholar watches the water, the watchmen make the noise, the city obeys. You picture it. Outside, the drum echoes, neighbors groan, dogs bark, and someone mutters, "Already." I swear the last zheng was shorter. Humanity's skepticism about clocks is evidently timeless. Then, a curious tidbit. In some places, wealthy families commissioned ornate water clocks as household status symbols. Imagine guests admiring your beautifully carved bronze basin, pretending to care about time while really just envying the craftsmanship. Some clocks were adorned with dragons, phoenixes, or astrological motifs, turning something as dull as dripping water into a miniature work of art. It was less about punctuality and more about bragging rights. Yes, that's my clock. It drips better than yours. Historians still debate whether these luxury clepsydras were actually used for practical timekeeping or simply displayed as decorations. A few descriptions suggest the owners barely touched them, preferring to let servants guess the hour the old-fashioned way, by squinting at the sun. The scholar in front of you clearly does not belong to the wealthy camp. His vessel is plain, utilitarian, stubbornly unadorned, and yet his pride in it radiates like sunlight warming a cracked tile. He is not chasing elegance but certainty, something that refuses to shift when the rooster crows or the watchman oversleeps. You step outside for a moment. The city is just beginning to stir. A fishmonger yawns into his hands. A neighbor ladles water from a well. A child chases a dog already tired of the game. The sound of dripping stays with you, following you into the street, echoing in your ears even after the door closes behind you. It feels like the city itself is breathing in rhythm with the water clock, though in truth it is probably just you, still half dreaming. The scholar waves absent-mindedly through the doorway, already pouring fresh water into the bowl to begin the next cycle. Time, like laundry, is never really finished. You wander into the street market, where time has its own pace. Merchants are setting up stalls, spreading cloths, arranging baskets of fruit, vegetables, spices. They measure their day not by official water clocks, but by the shadows growing under their awnings, by the rhythm of bargaining, by how quickly the bean cakes disappear. It's less precise, but certainly more delicious. Still, you notice the influence of scholars in the background. A man shouts about a new calendar issued by the court, his voice half proud, half annoyed, as though he himself had to chisel each number. The empire relies on timekeeping for rituals, taxes, and festivals. But here in the market, people just want to know, when does the holiday start? And more importantly, how many dumplings will it involve? The fact of this section, water clocks were not just for astronomers and bureaucrats. By the Song dynasty, public water clocks were placed in certain city squares, allowing ordinary citizens to check the hour. Imagine walking into the marketplace, craning your neck not for prices but for a dripping contraption announcing how late you are. Public timekeeping meant the state reached into daily lives more than ever before, pulling even casual shoppers into its schedule. An old woman selling chestnuts chuckles as she watches you gaze at one such contraption in the corner of the square. The water drips into a tall container with markings, while a young apprentice occasionally shuffles over to check the float and shout the hour. His voice cracks on every number, turning the solemn duty into comedy. A child claps in delight, not because she understands time, but because someone yelled loud enough to scare a pigeon. Your obscure tidbit emerges here. In some regions, the apprentices who managed public clocks became minor celebrities. People remembered their voices, joked about their punctuality, and sometimes composed little verses about their reliability or lack thereof. Imagine being immortalized not for brilliance, but for shouting fourth hour, in a voice that squeaked. Yet scholars are unsure how widespread these public water clocks really were. Some records describe them in grand detail, others remain oddly silent. It could be that only major cities enjoyed them, while villages stuck to roosters, drums, and intuition. You can't help but sympathize with the villagers. Simpler, yes, but also quieter. The market hums with life. You buy a sticky rice cake, mostly because it's warm and soft in your hand. As you chew, you notice how nobody seems terribly rushed. The water clock may drip, the apprentice may shout, but fruit is still arranged slowly. Gossip flows faster than business, and someone is definitely napping under their stall before noon. Time, you realize, is both strict and negotiable depending on whether you're an emperor or a chestnut seller. You wander back past the scholar's house, hearing once more the steady plink from inside. Remember that float. It's still rising, still recording, still insisting the world can be measured. You smile, knowing that outside these walls, people remain gloriously imprecise, and between the scholar's dripping certainty and the market's cheerful chaos, you find yourself balanced, swaying gently, like a leaf floating downstream. By midday, the sun sharpens, turning the tiled roofs into sheets of glare. You drift toward a shaded courtyard where a small crowd has gathered. They sit cross-legged, fanning themselves lazily, watching what looks at first like a puppet show. But no, it is another water clock, this one more theatrical than the scholar's plain bowl. Bronze dragons spout water from their mouths into a basin below, the drops sparkling like tiny jewels in the light. A man in silk robes explains loudly, too loudly, how this clock is more accurate than the stars themselves. You suspect exaggeration. Still, the contraption is mesmerizing. A float rises, pulling a cord that tugs on a small figurine. The figurine lifts a gong, striker, and clang. The sound rings through the courtyard, startling a flock of sparrows. Everyone applauds, though half the audience looks more entertained by the birds than the clock. Here is your fact. Elaborate striking water clocks appeared in the Tang and Song dynasties, combining time measurement with spectacle. Figures moved, bells rang, drums beat, all set in motion by dripping water and cleverly hidden mechanisms. These devices were less about necessity and more about prestige. Timekeeping became a performance, not just a duty. You lean closer, noticing the small gears and rods that move in careful sequence. The craftsman beams, as though daring you to catch him in a mistake. Children gape at the dragon mouths, whispering superstitions about how the drops are actually fragments of the dragon's breath. One girl insists that if you collect enough drips, you gain good fortune for the year. You almost wish it were true, though carrying buckets of dragon breath home sounds impractical. And now, a peculiar tidbit. Some records suggest that these striking clocks were occasionally used for parties. Their elaborate chimes marking courses of a banquet. Imagine sipping rice wine, nibbling roasted duck, and then hearing a wooden figure bang a drum to tell you it's time for dessert. The guests probably cheered louder for the sweets than the clock. Of course, historians still debate how reliable these showpiece clocks were. Some argue they frequently malfunctioned, leaving awkward silences where bells should have rung. Others claim they worked flawlessly, a true testament to Chinese ingenuity. Standing here, watching a small figurine miss its cue and drop its striker into the basin, you lean toward the awkward silence theory. The craftsman coughs, waves his hands, insists this never happens. The audience laughs politely. You find yourself oddly charmed. This is time not as a strict master, but as entertainment. The dripping water, instead of whispering you into slumber, now orchestrates a comedy of gears and gongs. And yet, beneath the spectacle, the rhythm remains the same. Drip, drip, drip. Always steady, always pulling you back towards stillness. The craftsman, flushed with pride, invites the crowd to linger, but you drift away, back into quieter streets. The clang of the gong fades, replaced again by the softer sound of your own breathing, matching the hidden drip you still carry in your ears. The afternoon heat presses down, heavy and unrelenting, so you find refuge near a temple pond shaded by willows. The water is still, except for the occasional plop of a carp surfacing. But in the corner, you hear another drip. It seems you cannot escape it. Here though, the dripping is different. It flows from a bamboo tube, part of a simple clepsydra used by monks. One monk kneels nearby, adjusting the flow with serene patience. He smiles at you as if to say, yes, time matters here too, but only in the sense that prayer has its rhythm. He strikes a small wooden bell when the float reaches its mark, not to regulate an empire, but to signal the next round of chanting. Fact for this section, Buddhist monasteries in China often used water clocks to regulate prayer schedules. With rituals stretching across the day and night, precision mattered not for taxes or calendars, but for devotion. The drip became sacred, aligning earthly practice with cosmic order. The monks chant, their voices low and steady, blending with the dripping water until the two are indistinguishable. You feel your breath slow in response, your body surrendering to the calm repetition. The air smells of incense sandalwood, faint and smoky, and, for once, you think maybe the water clock is not just practical, but spiritual. An odd tidbit emerges here. In some monasteries, water clocks were believed to help train novices in patience. Young monks were told to sit and simply listen to the dripping, allowing their restless thoughts to dissolve into the rhythm. It sounds suspiciously like ancient meditation, or perhaps just a very polite way of keeping children quiet. Yet, scholars admit uncertainty. How widely such practices were actually used remains unclear. Some suggest the story was romanticized later, an appealing image of monks dissolving into timeless serenity. Others argue it was a genuine teaching tool. You lean back under the willow, not caring which is true, because the effect on you is immediate. The sound is as calming as a lullaby. You watch the bamboo tube tip slowly, water spilling out, then resetting to fill again. The cycle repeats, a gentle pendulum without metal or gears. The monk bows slightly and resumes his chant, as though the drip and the breath are part of the same liturgy. Nearby, a novice sneaks a bite of sesame cake when he thinks nobody is looking. You catch his eye. He freezes, then grins, crumbs tumbling from his lips. Even in sacred places, time includes snacks. You close your eyes, the drip now fading into the rhythm of chant, the chant fading into the sway of branches overhead. The world softens again, and you drift somewhere between temple pond and dream. The sun is sliding toward the horizon, painting the streets with amber light. You find yourself meandering back through the city, where shadows stretch long and uneven, like tired scribes reaching for one last word. The heat of the day cools at last, and vendors pack away their baskets, counting coins with satisfaction or mild despair. Somewhere in the distance, a water clock is still dripping, as persistent as an old man telling the same story again at dinner. You pause near a guard tower at the edge of the city. Here, time takes on a different shape. Soldiers prepare for the night watch, adjusting their armor with clinks and muttered complaints. At the base of the tower sits a stout water clock, guarded as carefully as a sword. The officer in charge checks the float, nods solemnly, then hands out orders for when the gongs will sound. Here lies the fact. Military outposts often relied on water clocks to divide their watches. Accuracy wasn't just about punctuality, it meant survival. Guards had to be rotated on time to avoid fatigue, and signals had to be given at precise hours to coordinate patrols. A sluggish drip could mean a vulnerable wall, and nobody wanted to be remembered as the commander who lost a battle because a bucket was leaky. You listen as one soldier jokes that the float always rises faster on his shift, which surely means the universe is against him. Another grumbles that the rooster back home never judged him this harshly. You smile faintly, realizing complaints about work schedules are a timeless profession in themselves. Then comes your odd tidbit. In some accounts, officers placed charms or small talismans near water clocks, believing they could ward off misfortune. One story tells of a commander who tied a strip of red silk around the float to ensure vigilance through the night. Whether the silk worked or not is anyone's guess, but it did make the float look like it was dressed for a festival. Scholars still debate whether these practices were superstition or just morale-boosting gestures. Either way, the men here seem reassured by the ritual, nodding respectfully as the officer adjusts the basin. The drip continues, steady as the soldiers march out in pairs. You lean against the tower wall, feeling the rhythm seep into your bones once more. The sky deepens into indigo. Torches flicker along the walls, and the water clock marks the invisible turning of hours. You wonder whether anyone notices how beautiful the sound is or whether they only hear it as an order. You slip away as the gong sounds, the first jeng of the night echoing across rooftops. The city tucks itself into evening, and you walk quietly, carrying the drip with you like a heartbeat. Night folds over the city again, cool and wide. The lanterns are lit, their glow soft and amber, making shadows feel less like darkness and more like blankets. You wander through narrow alleys where the sound of dripping water returns, though this time it comes not from an official clock, but from the eaves of a roof. Still, your mind translates it automatically into rhythm, as though the world itself has become a clepsydra. You arrive at a scholars' gathering, drawn by the murmur of voices and the faint pluck of a chin. Inside, several men sit cross-legged, scrolls unfurled, cups of wine in hand. In the corner, a modest water clock ticks away, its float glinting in lamplight. Nobody watches it closely, yet it holds authority over the evening's pace. Here is your historical anchor. Scholars often timed their debates and poetry contests using water clocks. Discussions could stretch late into the night, but the clock imposed subtle order. Each interval gave someone else the chance to speak, ensuring the wine did not monopolize the conversation. You listen as one man recites a verse about autumn leaves. Another counters with a line about moonlight. Their voices rise and fall, punctuated not by applause but by the gentle drip in the corner. Eventually, one man grows too animated, speaking past his allotted interval, until the float rises and a servant clears his throat. Everyone laughs lightly. The man bows, and the next speaker begins. Democracy by bucket. The curious tidbit arrives here. Some gatherings even turned the water clock into a game. Poets challenged one another to compose a verse before the float reached its next mark. Failed to finish, and you owed the table a round of wine. It was both competitive and deeply impractical, since more wine meant slower poetry. Yet scholars admit uncertainty. Were these games common practice, or just the habits of particularly mischievous literati? Surviving records hint at them but don't provide enough detail to know. You suspect the truth lies somewhere in between, a tradition formalized only after enough wine was involved. The evening drifts on, the poets chuckle, the chin hums softly, the drip continues without judgment. You sip the wine offered to you, noticing it tastes faintly of plums and smoke. Warmth settles into your chest, mixing with the rhythm until even your thoughts seem to drip one by one. By the time the gathering winds down, you are nearly as drowsy as the oil lamp in the corner. The scholars bow, their sleeves brushing the floor, their voices slurred with both reverence and drink. The water clock, ever steady, continues alone after everyone has gone. The truest poet of them all, reciting in droplets until morning. The streets are hushed now, emptied of chatter, lanterns dimming one by one. You step carefully along the cobblestones, guided more by memory than sight. Somewhere behind you, the scholars still linger, perhaps arguing about who recited the better poem. Ahead, you hear of course a drip, always a drip. At this point, you could almost believe the whole city is one enormous water clock, each household adding a note to the same rhythm. You follow the sound into a workshop tucked behind a crooked wooden gate. Inside, a craftsman is hunched over his tools, bronze scraps scattered around him like fallen leaves. He doesn't notice you at first, so absorbed is he in hammering a small basin into shape. When he finally looks up, he wipes sweat from his brow, gestures toward his half-finished creation, and shrugs in that universal way of artisans. It's not perfect, but it's mine. Fact for this section, the making of water clocks was itself a specialized craft. By the Song dynasty, clockmakers developed reputations for their skill in shaping bronze, calculating holes with precision, and designing floats that wouldn't wobble like drunks. Some were employed directly by the court, tasked with producing official instruments worthy of imperial rituals. Others sold simpler versions in markets, hoping scholars or temples might need them. The craftsman here is clearly the latter. His workshop smells of hot metal, lacquer, and sesame oil, probably from the snack he forgot on a shelf. He shows you a tray of rejected floats, too heavy, too light, too crooked. Each one is a failure measured not in minutes, but in humility. A curious tidbit slips in. Some artisans carved their signatures discreetly into the base of water clocks, a subtle claim of authorship. It was risky, since imperial officials often demanded anonymity for craftsmen, treating the finished product as the emperor's glory alone. But pride is a stubborn drip, and a few daring names have survived etched in bronze. Imagine hiding your autograph under a bucket and hoping centuries later someone would notice. Historians are still uncertain how widespread this practice was. Were these signatures acts of defiance, or simply private flourishes never meant to be found? The craftsman before you smiles slyly, as though he has just carved his own secret mark. You don't ask where it feels safer not to know. He offers you a cup of barley tea, lukewarm and metallic from the bronze kettle. You sip politely, while he returns to filing the lip of a vessel. The rasping sound joins the dripping water in the corner, creating a duet of industry and inevitability. You wonder how many nights he has worked like this, measuring his hours not in sleep, but in drops and scratches. At last, he sets down his tools, pats the half-finished bowl as if it were a child, and waves you off with a tired grin. You leave him there, still surrounded by his floats and fragments, each one a promise of more dripping to come. The night deepens. The city exhales into silence, broken only by the occasional bark of a dog or the roll of a cart returning late. You wander toward the outskirts, where fields stretch into darkness and stars glimmer above like 1,000 tiny lamps. Out here, time feels older, less tamed. Farmers rise and rest with the rhythm of seasons, not drips. Yet even here, you stumble across a humble water clock, perched outside a small hut. The farmer who owns it nods in greeting, then chuckles at your surprise. His clock is crude, just a clay bowl with a hole chipped by hand, set to drip into another. The float is nothing more than a gourd cut hollow, painted with uneven stripes, yet he treats it with the same reverence as the scholar does his bronze. Fact of this section: water clocks were not exclusive to the elite. Simpler versions existed among common folk, helping them mark the hours for irrigation, cooking, or household routines. Though less precise, they offered a sense of structure in days otherwise ruled by sun and soil. The farmer lifts the gourd float with pride, explaining how he painted each stripe to mark different chores. When it sinks this far, he gestures, my wife stirs the porridge. When it sinks here, I feed the ox. And when it sinks all the way, well, then it's time to rest. Practical, imperfect, and utterly human. Your curious tidbit: some folk believed that water from a clepsydra held a trace of time's essence, and sprinkling it on crops could bring good harvests. Whether this was superstition or simply an excuse to water plants late at night is unclear. The farmer admits he's tried it, laughing at himself but also glancing at his field, as though half convinced it works. And yes, historians still debate whether such folk practices were common or just recorded as curiosities by amused officials. The lack of written evidence leaves gaps as wide as the farmer's grin. You sit with him for a while, listening to the drip against clay. It feels different from the scholar's bronze, less sharp, more hollow, like rain tapping on a jar. The stars above seem to listen too, shimmering in rhythm with each drop. The farmer scratches his ox behind the ears, content in this slow companionship of man, beast, and bucket. You realize then that time, whether measured in grand towers or humble gourds, has always been the same. A way of turning chaos into pattern, of giving shape to the long, uncertain night. You breathe deeply, the smell of soil and hay filling your chest, and you feel yourself softening again, as though the earth itself is rocking you gently toward rest. Dawn creeps over the horizon like a cautious guest, the first streaks of pink brushing the sky. You're back within the city walls now, the streets damp with dew and oddly quiet. Only the faint sound of a broom sweeps somewhere nearby, accompanied as always by a drip. You follow it like a thread, and soon you're standing in front of a tall building, the Bureau of Astronomy. Its gates loom solemnly, as though guarding secrets too heavy for everyday ears. Inside, officials in long robes shuffle through the courtyard, carrying scrolls and instruments. Bronze armillary spheres glint faintly, poised to trace the heavens, and tucked against a wall, a massive water clock sits like a throne for time itself. This one is far grander than any you've seen before. Multiple basins feeding into each other, floats connected to rods tugging on wooden figures that mark the hours. You feel suddenly small, as though you've stumbled into the gears of the universe. Here's your historical fact. During the Han and later dynasties, astronomical bureaus relied on water clocks to track celestial events. The dripping water synchronized their observations of stars, planets, and eclipses. Precision here wasn't just academic, it shaped the empire's calendar, which in turn dictated farming, festivals, and imperial rituals. One miscounted drip could ripple outward until the emperor himself offered sacrifices on the wrong day. A clerk hurries past, balancing a bundle of bamboo slips. You catch a glimpse of his notes, neat rows of star names, each carefully aligned with times marked by the clock. His brushstrokes are sharp, disciplined, the handwriting of someone who hasn't seen a bed before midnight in weeks. He frowns at the float, mutters something under his breath, and scribbles again. The curious tidbit for this section: some records mention that during particularly long nights of observation, astronomers used scented sticks of incense alongside water clocks. Each stick burned a predictable length of time, offering a fragrant backup in case the drip betrayed them. Imagine the bureau filled with the smell of sandalwood, half observatory, half spa. Yet scholars today still argue about how strictly incense was paired with water clocks. Was it truly systematic, or simply a convenience for nights when someone forgot to refill the basin? You glance at the sleepy-eyed clerk and suspect the latter. You linger in the courtyard, listening as the giant clepsydra plinks its way through the dawn. Around you, men debate constellations with serious faces, as if arguing with the stars themselves. You realize this is time not for poetry or chores, but for empire, an entire nation waiting for drops to align with orbits. And yet, the rhythm is still the same. Soft, patient, relentless. The universe apparently also runs on dripping water. By afternoon, the bureau fades behind you, replaced once again by the livelier hum of the city. Merchants shout, carts rattle, and children play tag through alleys, too narrow for such chaos. You let the noise wash over you, yet somewhere beneath it all, you still hear the imagined drip. You pass a tea house, its open windows spilling laughter and steam. Inside, travelers rest their legs, cups of fragrant oolong steaming before them. In the corner sits yet another water clock, this one modest but well cared for. The owner clearly relies on it, not for science, but for business: how long to steep a pot, when to announce closing, when to politely usher guests out with exaggerated yawns. Here is your anchor fact. By the Song dynasty, tea culture flourished, and water clocks often found their way into tea houses and inns. Timing the steeping of leaves was considered an art, and water clocks offered a practical, if occasionally stubborn, companion. A waiter demonstrates proudly. He pours hot water into a pot, glances at the float, and declares that the tea will be ready by the next notch. Customers nod, impressed, though one mutters that his grandmother can judge tea just fine without a bucket. You sip when offered, and the brew is indeed perfect, though whether to credit the clock or the leaves is unclear. Here comes the curious tidbit. Some tea houses reportedly held little competitions, where guests bet on whether the float would reach its mark before or after a certain cup was finished. It wasn't gambling in the serious sense, more like playful wagers of who would pay for dumplings. You can almost hear the laughter of those who lost on a particularly slow drip. Historians still debate how widespread such games really were. Some sources treat them as common amusements, others barely mention them at all. Perhaps the truth is like tea itself, stronger in some places, weaker in others. You linger in the tea house, warmed by both drink and company. The clock drips, steady and soothing, while stories from travelers drift around you, tales of distant provinces, mountain temples, floods, famines, and fortunes. Each tale stretches the hours, yet the float rises steadily, indifferent to exaggerations. By the time you leave, dusk is curling its fingers over the rooftops again. The shopkeeper bows, the waiter calls goodnight, and the drip remains behind. marking time for the next round of stories. You step back into the street, where lanterns bloom once more, and the rhythm of the city settles into the familiar lull of evening. The night has returned, softer than before, as if the city itself has grown weary from so much dripping. Lanterns flicker like fireflies, their glow painting golden halos on stone walls. The streets are quiet but not empty. An old man sweeps, a dog trots, a child hums herself towards sleep. Somewhere, as always, a vessel drips steadily into another. You could almost believe the whole empire exhales in rhythm with that sound. You retrace your steps toward the scholar's chamber, the first place where you heard time fall drop by drop. Through the open window you glimpse him, still hunched over his bronze bowl, brush-scratching notes that will outlast tonight. His float rises obediently, his marks accumulate, and his sighs remain just as impatient. He glances once at the shutter, catches sight of you, and nods without surprise. For him, visitors come and go, but the drip is eternal. Here, in the quiet of this final evening, you understand the larger truth. The water clock was never about conquering time. It was about living with it, measuring, not perfection but persistence, creating rhythm where chaos might otherwise reign. Empires used it for rituals, soldiers for watches, farmers for chores, poets for games. From bronze dragons in courtyards to clay bowls in cottages, the same soft drip carried centuries forward. An obscure tidbit lingers as well. Some late Ming accounts describe people using small travel-sized water clocks, tucked into wooden boxes, carried along on journeys. Imagine hauling your personal dripping companion across provinces, like an ancient pocket watch that leaks. Whether these were common or simply curiosities remains unclear, but the image is oddly endearing. A traveler measuring the road by drops instead of miles. Historians still debate countless details: how accurate the clocks truly were, how widely they were used, how often they malfunctioned. But perhaps precision was never the point. The truth of water clocks lives, not in the numbers, but in the sound that lulled scholars, monks, and maybe even restless wanderers like you into quiet acceptance of passing hours. You stand once more at the threshold of the scholar's chamber, listening. The bronze vessel glimmers faintly in lamplight. The float rises with lazy determination. The brush scratches a final line. Outside, the watchman's clapper echoes faintly. Dogs bark in response, and yet, beneath it all, the drip remains unchanged. You realize then that you, too, have been walking in its rhythm all along, every step matching the quiet persistence of water. And so, the story softens, loosens, fades. Now let your breath fall into the rhythm you've been hearing all along. In and out. Slow, steady, patient, as water meeting earth. The city grows quieter around you, its lanterns dimming, its doors closing, its watchmen pacing like shadows along the walls. The scholar's brush stills, the rooster finally sleeps, the markets rest their baskets. And yet the drip continues, unbothered, unhurried. You picture the bowl filling, drop by drop, until the surface trembles at its edge. You see the float rising slowly, as though carried upward by time itself. You hear the faintest ripple, the smallest splash. You feel the calm that comes from knowing the next drop will fall exactly as it should. Imagine yourself lying down near that vessel, the clay cool beneath your palm, the air faint with ink and sandalwood. Each drip is a heartbeat, not of worry, not of haste, but of persistence. The sound does not demand you wake, or act, or count. It only asks you to notice, then to let go. Outside, the stars wheel overhead, the same stars that emperors consulted, that farmers prayed beneath, that monks measured with patience. They shine with no urgency. They, too, have all the time in the world, and so do you. Let your shoulders loosen, your breath soften, your thoughts drip away one by one. Nothing needs to be done now. Nothing waits but sleep. The scholar will keep listening, the monk will keep chanting, the farmer will keep tending, time will keep dripping, whether you are awake or not. So close your eyes, drift slowly, and let the water carry you forward, drop by drop, into rest.